Call this meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's move on to public comments. Mr. Doyle, what do we got?
We have no public speakers, Mr. Chair. I guess they'll show up tonight.
Okay. All right. Next, then, we have the approval of the minutes from the September 13th board meeting. If there are no objections to approval, they are approved. We're going right along here. We're ready now for board business. Let's begin with the Development Authority of Cobb County. Mr. Ragsdale, you want to?
As the chairman of the Development Authority of Cobb County. I have with me Mr. Nelson Jeter, who's our executive director. We've got two projects we'd like to discuss with y'all and present to you that we think will be an enhancement to the county, and we have representatives from those to be here and to answer any questions that you might have. We know you've got a packed agenda, so we'll move as quickly as we can. Mr. Jeter, if you'll introduce the people.
Thank you, Mr. Hungerford. Thank you all for allowing us the opportunity to, as Clark indicated, to introduce two new and very exciting projects for Cobb County. The first of which is Project Run under that code name, but now the prospect has been identified, and of course it's Home Depot. And it is a $50 million plus project that will generate 700 new jobs with an average salary of over $100,000. Representing Home Depot, we have Mr. Jim McCarty and their legal counsel, Mr. Ken Pollard, who will bring forth the presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to present this to you this afternoon. My name is Ken Pollock. I am the attorney representing Home Depot. I'm from the law firm Butler Snow in Atlanta. This is a project that Home Depot has been working on for a long time and is very excited to have the opportunity to work with the Development Authority to keep their growth in Cobb County. I'm going to let Jim McCarthy, who's here with me, who is a senior director of real estate and working very closely on this project, describe the project in more detail, and then we can answer any questions that you have. I would, before Jim comes forward, also like to mention that this involves a lease of a facility at the Pennant Park Office Park in Cobb County, and the two buildings that are proposed to be leased by Home Depot are owned by an entity by the name of INOP Acquisitions. And we also have a representative here from that entity who is the actual owner of the building. His name is Ken Kraft. And so if there's any questions for him as well, he'll be available to answer questions.
Hi, I'm Jim McCarthy, as Ken mentioned. I'm responsible for all the retail and office assets of the company in the United States, and have been working very hard with economic development for a long time now on multiple projects as we continue to expand our presence in Cobb County. It's been almost 40 years since the first Home Depot opened, and we now have over 2,200 stores and one of the 5 largest retailers in the United States. And it's great to be able to say that and be located here in Cobb County and contribute to the community the way we do. We have, including all of our stores and the corporate folks, we have about 14,000 people that are employed in Cobb County. between our corporate office. We expanded the corporate office to the Cumberland office across the highway, probably about 15 years ago, I think. And then we ended up adding the Marietta Technology Center, which started out as a little 100,000 square foot add to our campus, is now over 300,000 square feet, almost takes up the entire campus at Franklin Road and Highway 41. I began my career on Franklin Road, just north of Delk, in a relatively small divisional office at the time. It's been fun to watch our company change. It's also sometimes hard to catch your breath. We're growing at such a rapid rate. And so what we decided several months ago was we needed to find a home for more people. We're absolutely busting at the seams. We've actually talked to Cobb County DOT about some of our issues, just getting people in and out of our office. So adding another 215 or so thousand square feet to our corporate office will help not only with the traffic around our existing office, will allow us the space across all the campuses to add, as Mr. Jeter said, about 700 more associates into Cobb County. We're really excited about the growth. I know our associates in the SSC are very excited about it too, because it allows us to spread our elbows just a little bit instead of working two to an office as we have in many offices in our building. So it's an ongoing effort. This, as was mentioned, we're going to spend about $45 to $50 million over the course of the next year or two to build out these offices, and it's a fairly urgent need. And in an era where there are a lot of companies out there looking around, and we face it every day as we look in the activities that we're doing on the retail side, industrial side, and office in some markets, we're often faced with the prospect of being the outsider. Here it's nice to be kind of the hometown boy, and we like it here in Cobb County. And it's been, whether it's, Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, Kennesaw State, all the universities in the area have become major contributors to the people that we hire into our organization. So very pleased with that. Just a few details on it. As was mentioned, it's about a $45 million investment. We're going to lease this property. We own the SSC. We own Cumberland. We lease MTC. It's a mixed bag for us on owning or leasing. We tend to like to own our stores, the core of our company. We tend to lease the pieces of our company that are not as much core, in the industrial and the office. We tend to lease. It's just a philosophy for us. So we're going to sign an 11-year lease here with renewals to extend well into the future. The goal is to continue to have these campuses around our existing SSC so that these associates can get back and forth. We have buses that go between our different campuses to allow those associates to interact with the SSC or with one of the other facilities. So it's a lot of people moving around, and we're still kind of working on which group will go initially to the first building, and then we'll figure out the second building as we go. So those are the broad details of what we're doing, and the incentive that we're asking for is an incremental incentive. The tax digest values these buildings around $17 million. We're not touching that. We're not asking for that to be touched. It's the incremental investment that we'll be making that we've been asking for an incentive on. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Banks, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation, and we do like Home Depot.
Thank you.
First of all, let me say that in East Cobb, in Post 5, we do have a few houses still for sale. So you're welcome. We have, as a board, we have the numbers that you presented to us, but the public hasn't seen these numbers. Can you briefly go over how these numbers impact us for the next 10 years?
Well, I know and Ken, you may be able to help me with this, but I know at the end of the day, the Georgia Tech did the independent study, and Nelson may be able to also help this. So why don't I defer to you guys?
Well, the numbers that went into the study are actually, we were very conservative. I think we put in, wasn't it 42 million of capital investment? Even though, as Jim said, it's most likely will be higher than that. But based on $42 million of capital investment over the next 2 years, most of which will be spent in 2019, I believe. And
2019.
the addition of approximately 700 new employees with this project. The study came back with a positive impact of benefits of a little over $7.5 million, with a present value of $1.7 million positive that's to the county.
The school system's on the back.
And so positive 1.7 million to the county, and positive net present value of little over $500,000 to the school district over the 12-year period.
Okay, to understand correctly, our first year revenue will still be what it would have been otherwise. Is that correct? From a tax standpoint?
That is correct, because all of our agreements where there are tax savings involved, we require pilot payment in lieu of tax, where there won't be an erosion to the existing tax base.
Okay, good. You mentioned that there will be 700 new jobs. Can you break that down a little bit as to what type of management, what type of employees will you be hiring in that 700?
I can try to do that. We just are finishing our 2018 planning process for growth. And as you can imagine, in a company that's growing at 5 or 6% a year, and our online business, which is growing at over 20% a year, it's all across the board, except for in real estate. We don't get any new people. But our .com, our online business, which is growing furiously, there is a huge, and you may have read, we're investing about $1.3 billion over the next 5 years in industrial warehousing space to ensure that we can get product to you, our customers, in 1 to 2 days. And we're doing that across the entire U.S. So our logistics, our supply chain, all the technology jobs that are required that support that initiative, it's really all across the board. So it's almost entirely management positions. There naturally be some support positions to help that. The 700 is not contract employees. These are Home Depot associates, and really almost in every facet of our business. Services, where we come in and, to simplify, where we lay carpet in your home. There's a lot of people that are behind all those services, and that is a rapid growth of our company as well.
My next question is a little bit out of scope of what you're here for, but can you comment on what Home Depot is doing as far as the future, as far as robotics and AI, and also comment on the sales tax for online sales? How are you all handling that?
Well, I'm a 30-year real estate guy. I'm not sure I can spell AI, but as far as artificial intelligence, I know there's a lot of initiatives that are going forward in parts of our building that deal with that. Robotics, in our direct fulfillment centers, for instance, in the direct fulfillment, as well as we have another a type of distribution facility where we initially went in and put in all this racking, and you hand-picked and did this. The other day, my son happened to graduate from Georgia Southern in logistics, and I took him to our direct fulfillment center in Locust Grove, and he watched things that were going on, things that got picked without a human involved, ended up in a box on a UPS truck that was touched one time. And that's the scope of what we have to be able to get to. Let's face it, we've been put on our toes, as has Walmart, as has most any brick and mortar retailer by Amazon. And we are quite well prepared to take that on, and we're investing money to ensure that we continue to grow that business at the rate that we can. So there will be initiatives in everything you're talking about, yes.
Okay, and the sales tax,
I can't answer that.
okay,
I wish I could.
okay. Well, your comments about the robotics and this is the future. And I think as a board, we're obligated to make sure we're prepared for that future. So that's the reason I bring this question up is it's happening everywhere, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So I appreciate your comments, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scamahorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Jeter. And Mr. McCarthy, was it explained to you why you come and present before the school board?
I believe so, yes. I mean,
Okay. What might that be?
well, we're here to try to secure your support for the incentive, and we hope to obtain that support so that we can move forward.
Okay. And I think I don't know if Mr. Jeter might help me out here, but did we not award or support an abatement about 3 or 4 years ago for Home Depot?
Well, I mean, Home Depot, obviously, a large company, so they have several projects. I mean, obviously, Home Depot is a very large company with a tremendous growth strategy. So over the past several years, yes, we have done several transactions with every tax savings associated with it.
Okay. One of the things that I guess I wonder about is you're putting the money in to remodel and to basically furnish the buildings. Is that correct?
A significant upgrade to the entire facility.
So really, once you finish that, then that basically belongs to the owner of the buildings, correct? In fact, I thought I read something where.
Yes.
Well, except for the.
Okay.
The personal property would naturally still be ours.
Okay. And what is personal property? Is that like computers or?
Computers, desks.
Furniture fixtures.
Okay. And generally on our support and looking at these projects, and Mr. Jeter, you may correct me, we're usually supporting buying of the land or the capital asset, not just in leasing. I don't recall one where.
Actually, you supported most of the time the purchase of real property and the purchase of personal property. But the law allows you to capture leasehold improvements in a bond transaction as well.
Okay. Well, I didn't mean to imply we might be doing something illegal.
Oh, no. Forgive that answer, please.
Yeah, I am pro-business,
I
but
may be able to add something
thank you.
to that.
Sure. We're informal. Go for it.
Yeah. So Home Depot is entering or has proposed to enter into a lease with the existing owner of these 2 buildings, which are now, unoccupied. So they will take these 2 buildings under a long-term lease that's essentially a triple net lease where Home Depot has all the benefits of possession of the building and use of the building and also pays all of the expenses of the building. So any tax liability that is attributable to the real estate will flow through the owner down to Home Depot, and they'll be responsible for making those payments. So that's why it's an incentive really for the tenant in the building, Home Depot, and not as much, if at all, for the actual owner of the building.
Well, this is for any of you also. So we've got a lease for 11 years. So, and the way business moves, I mean, and you all know, I mean, just read the business publications or whatever. I mean, you got to be nimble and on your toes. And one of my, I guess it's more of a concern than a thought, is just when the county/school system would realize full, I don't know, development, if you will, then
Right.
the lease is up and we're gone. We're going to take our computers and go home.
Right.
You know, so that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to the answer, both what Jim may be able to provide and also what the representative of the owner can comment on. But I think what both of them will tell you, and I'm happy to let them speak for themselves, but I think the short answer is that they're both making substantial commitments with Home Depot investing, $45 to $50 million. They're in that building for the long term, and they're under the proposed lease. There's options to renew and extend, so they intend to stay for the long term. On the other flip side of the coin, I can't speak for the owner, but my guess is that when they've got a tenant like Home Depot, who's one of the top companies in the country, as a tenant in their building, a very strong credit, they're not looking to replace them quickly. They're happy to have a tenant like that in the building. So
You're trying to, I guess, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but what you're saying is with all of that investment, the likelihood of staying 20 years instead of just 11, is that what we should believe or have
well,
confidence
again,
in?
like you said, I mean, nobody can predict the future, but
Well,
go ahead, Jim.
Here, while we're coming, let me add to that. At the end, the way and I understand it, and we've done on the others, our abatement is on a sliding scale over 10 years. And just as we see full fruition of the privilege of the abatement, likelihood it could be gone. That's my thought.
Well, that's an interesting way. The good news is, hypothetically, if we were to walk away, that property is still valued at that level, and it's getting ready to likely have a much bigger additional investment, right? But I will say
I
this.
agree.
We have not downsized since we started in 1979. So the idea, can things change? Absolutely. Could something happen? Absolutely it could. But we have to hedge our bet a little bit too. If I sign a 20-year deal at market today, I'm risking that the market never gets worse. It only gets better.
Agree.
If I do an 11-year deal, which gives good financing for the owner if necessary, gives us a longish term commitment, and I start at market today, and I have increases all along, at the 11th year, I get an opportunity. I have a right to renew at fair market value, or I have a right to renegotiate that deal as the Home Depot occupying 215,000 square feet. We often use that leverage with our owners, and our owner well knows this, and that's why they argue for longer term. I argue for shorter term, because we're both going to work from a position of leverage. We won't want to lose our space, but we also want to try to lower our overhead. So it's a very delicate balance of how long is too long, how long is too short. In this instance, we don't ever sign 11-year office leases. Very, very seldom do we do that. We did that at Marietta Tech Center because we believe in the technology. We're going to continue to add technology to our infrastructure because it's just to the point the gentleman mentioned about robotics. Well, robotics are great, but it takes someone, a human being, to teach the robotics how to operate. You still have to have human beings out of Tech, out of Kansas State, out of Georgia State, all these wonderful kids that know so much more about this than I do, that you've got to have that flexibility of what are we going to do long term. So.
Okay. And I may have missed it. Where are these buildings located specifically?
Pennant Park is at the intersection of,
Yeah. The buildings that are right across the street from the Weather Channel, if you're familiar with that, there are 3 buildings there, 2 of which they're going to take over.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, two points I'd like to make on behalf of the Development Authority. One is you ask about personal property, and you've got real property, which is buildings, land buildings, that's the thing. Personal property is really everything else. And in today's society, you know, a lot of people don't just use hammer saws, mixers, that sort of thing. As Mr. Banks asked, a lot is now going to technology. And so a lot of the investment is for technology to allow them to improve their service to their customers throughout the country. So you begin to see more and more of that because that's what's coming out down the pipe. We don't have enough opportunities to build new buildings. Most of what we brought to you in the past has been for the construction of new facilities. But the other point I want to make is this is taking property right now that is vacant and generating little, if any, revenue. So if you've got an opportunity to move somebody in there and have it generate revenue, have it be improved for the tax base, then it is an improvement. And yes, you don't get 100% of it immediately, but you do get more faster than you would if you waited. And who knows, is it a year? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years to get somebody to move in there? So you do get a bump as soon as it's finished, but you don't lose anything in the meantime. You continue to get the pilot payments. You don't lose any revenue. It's a revenue neutral until the improvements are in, and then it begins to increase over a period of time. So you get some more quicker than you would have if you didn't do this incentive to have them. And I do think, without a doubt, a 40-year record of establishment, it's hard to believe because I can remember when they opened their first store here in Cobb County, that they've got a track record of not only staying in the county, but growing in the county. And I hope they come back and ask for more expansion for other things that we can come back and make a presentation to you, because I think it's good for everybody in the county and good for the school system. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. I've got a question. Has Home Depot made any effort or consideration to purchase this building?
At the very beginning, when I started the search, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, we actually were looking at buying different facilities around Atlanta. And we kept coming back to Cobb County, mainly because it's where our home is, it's where our associates live, it's where they work. And so there aren't many buildings that will yield 200,000 square feet left in Atlanta. These happen to be there. And so I approached the owner and said, you know, we'd very much be interested in purchasing. And that discussion didn't go real far. They weren't real interested in selling. And I can understand why, with SunTrust Park coming, everything that's going on around there. If I had an investment, I'd keep it.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. McCarthy. I appreciate it. And I've spoken with Clark a number of times as well as Nelson. A lot of people, you know, when they hear the term pilot, they don't really understand what it is. And so, I mean, I'll just kind of do it almost in a rhetorical sense, just so that, you know, it's easier. So when the Development Authority first was bringing projects to the Board of Education, there was no pilot arrangement. It's a number of years ago when the Board of Education actually had conversations with the Development Authority. It was stipulated, I believe, by the Development Authority that the school district would never earn any less than it is presently earning on the tax rolls of the property tax for those buildings. Is that your understanding?
That is our policy to do that. Right. And pilot stands, as Nelson said, payment in lieu of taxes. We want this to at least be revenue neutral until it becomes an improvement in the county. We're one of the few development authorities that do that. Others throughout the state do not require that. We have thought it's the best thing for both the county and the school system to take that position, and we have.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that people understand that is even with the abatements that are going, you know, to be approved by the Development Authority, that the school district never earns any less than it is currently earning. And conceivably, as the property values increase over time, the value and the funds that would actually accrete to the schools is far greater than it would be if the development did not take place.
As you will see it reported in the media, they will talk about how there's 0 for the first year and then 10% for the second year and go forward. The erroneous part of that is that we do require the pilot payments. And as I said, others may not. We do, so there is no degradation in the tax revenue that comes to the school system until it begins to improve.
That's correct. And I mean, it's characterized by some that the district is deprived of funds. And I want to make sure that people clearly understand that the district does not earn any less than it otherwise would or is currently earning today.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Anybody else with questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those were some excellent questions. We have another exciting project, Project LEAP. This is a home-based Cobb County company. In fact, the governor made the announcement last week that Home Decor had decided to expand its operations in Cobb County. Currently, they employ about 420 employees. Their plans over the next 5 years is to increase their employment base by another 420 employees with an average salary of $75,000. They will also be taking over space that is currently vacant over in the Wildwood area that was previously occupied by Koch Enterprises. To present their project, we have Ms. Amy Gerber, a site consultant, and Ms. Erin Hewen, who serves as bond counsel for the client.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us. I do want to say that our original intent was to have a representative from the company here with us, because I know that's who you want to get to know. Unfortunately, similar to our prior presenters, he also runs retail real estate for the company, and he is down in Florida assessing some of the damage that's happened to their retail presence, so he could not be here today, but we wanted to move forward because we do have an exciting project that we want to talk to you about, and if there are questions that we just can't answer, then we'll do our best to get him here at your next meeting. All right, so I'm going to try and go through this. There's a lot of similarities to what you just heard. I even noticed that our project names are not too far, Project Run and then Project Leap, so we have a lot in common. But as Nelson said, this is a company, a local company that has done very well and grown here. They were founded in 2000. Recently, in the last 2 years, went public. So you can actually watch their stock move around and see how they're performing. The other interesting thing with this company is, obviously, since they are a fairly new company, they have spent a lot of energy and a lot of time focusing on retail expansion. And in 2017 alone, they added 14 new stores across the country and have a plan to add over 400 stores over the next 15 years. So this is a company that's on a rapid growth trajectory. And obviously, as you heard before, to serve retail stores and customers and e-commerce, you have to have the people at headquarters to do that. So you're looking at a company that's looking to double its workforce over the next 2 years, which is a company that's continued to grow here locally. That's a really big deal for them. That's taken a long time for them to get there, to have the revenue generated from the retail that they have. I'm sure you noticed the increase in advertisements that we've all seen on the local TV. It's a testament to how well they've been run and managed and what they have that they're looking forward to. And in fact, they don't call their headquarters a headquarters. They call it a store support center, because that's what they do. So when we look at the types of the jobs that will be created, their e-commerce and marketing and HR and real estate and all those things that go into operating a successful retail presence. The company started in Kennesaw. They've been in Cobb County the whole time. They have not had the opportunity to come before the Development Authority, their school district before. So this is something that they're very excited to be able to talk to you about today. As Nelson mentioned, adding the 420 people over roughly a 60-month period in around $76,000 a year on average for those positions. They are currently in a building in Smyrna, and I guess the good news for them is they're growing big enough that they can't fit in that building anymore. So our firm helped them scour the area to find another building, and they found one, and we're very excited about that. It's at 2500 Windy Ridge Parkway. And in some of the other Development Authority meetings that we have had, Griffin Capital, who owns that building, has been there, so he is in full support of the building and what we're trying to attempt to do here with the property tax relief. There is one tenant within the building. The building's about 322,000 square feet. Floor and decor over roughly a 3-year period will take 185,000 square feet roughly. So obviously more than 50% of the building. And then there will still be vacant space left within the building. The landlord is GC Net Capital lease, and the term of the lease will exceed the term of the incentive that we are working with the Development Authority to accomplish. One of the interesting things about this building, when we went to, part of what we do is we do a 10-year cash flow analysis so the company can see what their ongoing operating costs will look like. So we went back to that building when it was fully occupied, as Nelson mentioned, with Coca-Cola. They relocated 500 jobs out of there starting in 2015. So when I go to the tax assessor rolls, I look at 2015 and 2016, and the building had an assessed value of roughly $23 million. And then, as you know, with a multi-tenant building, the assessor looks at that building based upon revenue stream. So once that revenue stream went away, we've seen a continued decrease in assessed value on that building. Today, in 2018, it's down to a $17 million assessed value. So what has that meant for the school district? Well, over 2 years, as that's continued to reduce, it's been about $100,000 in lost revenue, purely because a tenant did not exist in the building. So what we anticipate is, with our capital investment in the building to get the building up to where it needs to be on the floors that they intend to occupy, plus the new revenue stream, you could look at getting back to the 2016 numbers of 22, 23 million, and back to the revenues that the school was receiving through no fault of anybody's, were lost because of the lack of a tenant. So with that, just a couple of things. I know you've already talked about the pilot, and the company is fully aware that there will be a pilot payment made for all taxes that are existing today, so that everybody will be kept whole, and then the same tiered benefit beginning at the 100%, working its way down to 0% over a 10-year period on the equipment, the FF&E, the personal property, the IT, as well as the building improvements on that building. One of the other interesting things when we look at the cost analysis and the loci analysis is that when we look at what that means to school from a new student perspective, what you would expect is that with those 500 jobs that have left over the last few years, that these new jobs coming in hopefully are just backfilling some of the students that may have departed. And we do have a 5-year ramp up, so by the time we get to that 420, we're already 5 years into the property tax relief, and at least 50% of those taxes that were not in place already are already being received by the school district. So with that, I want to answer for you as many questions as possible, and if you have any questions for Aaron, we're here.
Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned the name of your company, but what do they do?
My company or Floor and Decor?
Floor and Decor.
Floor and Decor, they have retail stores that sell all types of flooring. So similar to the prior, as housing does as well as they do, and we see continued growth. They've done very well since they are providing a lot of materials needed to make home improvements, home construction, and those various.
Is one of their major projects tile?
Yes.
Okay. I have a bathroom.
We have a tile.
The tile came from Floor and Decor. So
Yes.
it's been a while, but it's still there.
Yes.
But thank you for the presentation.
Mr. Banks, there is a location at the corner of Barrett Parkway and 41, a retail location.
That's
I'm
where
sure they'd love to see you.
That's where I
Sales tax
shop.
revenue.
Okay.
In fact, I think I bought tile there several times. So
We appreciate your business.
and I look forward. Are you planning on expanding more stores in Cobb County?
Unfortunately, I don't know where those 400 stores will go, but I'm sure that's something the company looks at on an annual basis, and if that's data they can share, I'm sure they will.
Well, I want to say welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scamahorn, do you have a question or two?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. I'd like to ask you the same question that I started off with the other project. Were you, what information were you given to come before the board and why?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm very fortunate I get to do work all across the state. And this honestly is the first school board meeting that we've been able to participate in. Most development authorities make decisions that impact their school boards, and we don't get that chance to demonstrate the good corporate citizen that our client has and the impacts positive these projects have. So we are here to get you comfortable that this is a good project. It's going to generate good revenue for the city, county, and school district, and employ a lot of really good people.
Oh, thank you. And I know that Mr. Banks asked a couple of questions. I may have missed it. I think your company's name is still a secret, right? Or
No, it's Floor and Decor.
It's Floor Decor?
Floor and Decor, yeah, with the
Okay.
ampersand.
Okay. Now, are you, when you move to the new, are you buying the building?
No, it's a long-term lease.
So it's a lease like the
It
other
is.
project?
And just one thing to add to what has already been mentioned, when you have a company that's growing like they are, and I'm sure you see this with other presentations, companies tend to be conservative because the last thing they want to do is be in default or underperform. So when you have a company that's growing like that, just as in their current building today, what happens if we buy a building or take a longer lease that no longer works for us 5 years down the road? Then what do we do? So it's risk mitigation. You go into a lease term that makes sense, that you can adhere to, but then also giving yourself that flexibility if you need to relocate and continue to grow, that you have a lease that you can see through to the end and then make your next decision.
It is a 12-year term with renewal options.
Can you go to the mic?
The initial term of the lease is 12 years, but there are renewal options.
You read my mind. So
I'm good.
that was next. The one thing that I need to, and the purpose of my question is really not to oppose or to challenge necessarily. I mean, we represent the taxpayers, and I'm strongly pro-business, so that's not the question. But from my perspective, we look at, okay, what, why, and having said that, one of the things I'm thinking out loud is, again, and we talked about it on the other project, let me attack it a little differently. On a linear scale, yes, we start off at where we are, and in all honesty, I think Mr. Hungerford and I have had this conversation before. If it stays empty, we don't improve. But business, it's not going to stay empty. So one of my concerns or thoughts, pick your word, is that, okay, we give for the first 10 years on a sliding scale, and then everybody leaves. So actually, we come out short on the deal, at least in my perspective, unless, tell me where I'm wrong with that.
Yeah, and here's, my point of view is that I have a hard time seeing where there is a loss. If for some reason 12 years ends and you only have 2 years of full taxes, they're taxes that weren't there to begin with. And you could say, well, this is a really active market. That building will be leased to anybody else. But I'll tell you, in a really active market, it sat for 2 years. And even with this lease, it's not full. So we could wait and see if there's another client that comes forward for the building. But then we could be looking at another $60,000 in lost revenue in 2019. So there's always that chance. And as somebody mentioned before, you can't predict the future. Company can't make commitments beyond, the window of time that they have. But I do think you also have a lot of hometown. It's a hometown company as far as the county goes. And so, at least if they did turn around and leave, at least there's that new investment. We've increased the value of the building back to where it was. And there's extra room for them to continue to expand.
Okay.
If I can.
Yeah,
Ms. Gerber.
Mr. Hunt.
The word loss is probably incorrect in my estimation.
I agree.
Because you don't lose anything. What you do is you don't achieve the maximum possible. So you do achieve increased revenue over whatever period it is. And let's say for whatever reason they grow too fast to find out they need more space and they move somewhere else. Or they stay to the end of the term and want to build their own building and move to something else. During that period of time, you've increased revenue during that time. You have not given anything back. You have not deducted from what you are getting. Now, did you get the maximum you maybe could have? Don't know that because you don't know who might go in and what they might pay and what they might do to the building. If you use the assumptions that we either if we do this, we don't get the whole 100% over the whole period of time, you don't lose anything because nobody is you're not giving money back to the company. What you may not be doing is collecting as much as you could have if things were done differently. But if you don't do anything, you could have a continued deterioration in this building where you collect less money. That would be a loss if the tax base goes down. But just because you do an incentive doesn't mean you lose money. And I really have a problem with that word because it's not a loss. It's just maybe not an achievement at full expectations. Thank you.
Let me give you well said. That was the answer I was looking for so that people know. In fact, you read my mind. I was going to say, we're not really losing. We're just potentially not gaining what we may have if we had got a different tenant right away. But that's a gamble, and I concede that. Thank you all. And Mr. Chair, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scanhorn. Ms. Thayer, you have a question?
I just wanted to make a comment. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for the part that you play. We're not a separate entity. The school system is a part of our community. Our community can be no better than our school system, so we're all in this together. And we appreciate what the Development Authority does for our community. We thank all of you who work and play here. We appreciate what you do, and we're glad to be a part of that. And thank you for the growth that you're bringing to our community because that's always good for our school system. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you.
And I would say, without a good school system, we wouldn't have people coming to this community.
That's true. Thank you.
Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to hit on something you talked about earlier, and the thing, and I worked in commercial real estate financing for many years, bridge financing, mezzanine financing, construction development, CMBS, everything. But when you take a look at the income approach and valuation on these properties, it has a significant impact on what that valuation of the property may ultimately be. And so when you go to sell, or the landlord goes to sell this building, when they have a tenant in there that's generating significant levels of revenue, the value of that building goes up. When they transfer the building, that's recorded, and so you're going to see that uptick as far as the valuation of the building is concerned. And this may be more of a question for Clark. With regard to, let's say during the term of this lease, if there is and I think you take control of the title, but what if there's a transfer of the ownership of the property? How might that work, or is there any change?
Really doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the value of the building. It doesn't change the tenant and what they put in there and what their lease term is. The only possible opportunity you have of any sort of scare is if the tenant leaves. Right. If the tenant were to break their lease, then you've got all sorts of complications that come up. Plus, in our MOU that we have with this, we have a clawback provision that if they don't fulfill the terms of what they did in the way of improvement in the property, jobs, everything along with it, fulfill for that period of time, they're responsible back to us to the Board of Tax Assessors, to the tax collector, whatever incentive they were given that was not viable.
All right. That I was actually going to ask you about a clawback provision, so thank you for addressing that.
But if it changes ownership, that really doesn't make anything, unless a new owner were to come in and do something that was detrimental to the building.
Okay. And then just more of a commentary than anything else. The thing is, and people on this board have heard me talk about this for a while. It's really in our interest to see the commercial digest throughout the county grow. It will put less burden directly on the school system and yet generate more dollars per student. We've talked about how Marietta City school system enjoys nearly a $1,400 per student funding advantage relative to the Cobb County School District, and largely because of the larger commercial digest that they have. So I appreciate what you're all bringing to the table, and thank you for choosing Cobb County again, and good luck with your project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Chastain?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes I go to the doctor, I don't ask all the right questions, and I get home, my wife said, well, did you ask about this? I go, no, I didn't think about it. So here's my question. The statement from Georgia Tech says that there's the physical benefit of this project to the school board over the next 12 years is no, excuse me, wrong one. There we go. Is a negative $241,000. So the negative NPV, that is separate from the pilot payments? What exactly does that mean, so I can explain it to my wife? Thank you.
Well, what it means is that if you compare all new revenue, excluding the pilot payments, if you include all new revenue against all expenses, then it's showing a negative to the school system, about $241,000 over a 10-year period. This is a very conservative number. If you look into the body of the study, particularly when it has to do with taxes, you'll see that this study takes into account a depreciation schedule on real property, just buildings, not land. If you look at the appreciation schedule over the last 10 years in Cobb County, we've had growth in that particular area. So we're convinced that the growth in the assessed value over the next 10 years will offset that negative figure of $241,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chastain. Anyone else? Thank you for coming today.
We appreciate your time.
Once again, thank you.
Mr. Hornford, Mr. Jeter, thank you all. At this point, we're ready to do the superintendent's report. Mr. Ragsdale?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Jennifer Lawson to come forward, and this is going to be a combined report. Both her and John Floresta are going to present. So if you can, hold your questions until both are finished, because it kind of flows. Kind of serves twofold. One, to give the board, as the title indicates, an update on CTLS, but also to bring about some conversation about what exactly it means that we have applied to the state for the flexibility assessment pilot through SB 362, and also looking to be part of that application to the Federal Department of Education as it moves forward. So I'm sure we'll have a good discussion, but again, I just kind of wanted to set the stage for what the two phases will be. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Mr. Superintendent, we bring to you today an update on the Cobb Teaching and Learning System. The intent of this presentation is to provide the board with an update on the continued development, implementation, and enhancements of various components, all represented within this one robust system. As you will recall, the superintendent has identified 3 consistent priorities for our district. Ensure Cobb is the best place to teach, lead, and learn. Simplify our foundation for teaching and learning in order to prepare for innovation. And to use data to drive our decisions. It is our intention that through this presentation you will see how the Cobb Teaching and Learning System very intentionally and systematically supports these priorities and the personalized, differentiated instruction needed for high levels of learning for all students every single day. Before we jump into the live demonstration, some of the newer features and functionality we would like to spotlight. You will recall that we did provide a CTLS update about a year ago, so some of this will be a quick reminder and a review. I'd like to first take a moment to remind us what the original vision for the Cobb Teaching and Learning System was almost 8 years ago when we began this journey. Recognizing the importance that technology plays in the teaching and learning process, The district was and remains committed to providing an industry-leading digital teaching and learning environment designed by the Cobb County School District for and by teachers, leaders, students, and families of Cobb County. From the beginning, the district acknowledged this would be complex work that would involve the integration of multiple resources and partnerships for a seamless experience to be possible for our teachers, parents, and students in a way that supported a highly effective digital learning environment. It was also apparent that for each of our stakeholders, we were solving for something a little different, and accurately identifying those needs and priorities would be critical in getting this right for all of our stakeholders. For the teacher, we needed access to a personalized digital environment that serves as a one-stop shop for instructional resources that support highly effective and engaging instruction. For parents, we needed access to a personalized digital environment designed to truly support their individual child's learning and development. And for students, we needed access to a personalized digital learning environment that is connected to teachers and learning resources and provided access to classroom assessments. So where did we begin? Where are we now? And what's next? The first priority was to develop a flexible formative assessment system, also known as CTLS Assess. This system was designed to provide teachers with real-time, standards-based assessment of student mastery, thereby allowing our teachers to make better, more timely instructional decisions for our students. A few highlights from CTLS Assess since our last board presentation include: teachers have access to more than 200,000 standards-aligned, statistically valid and reliable test items in our item bank. We have recently added more than 72,000 items and are looking to add an additional 34,000 plus by the end of the 2018-19 school year. A majority of the 2,000 items are items purchased from leading assessment partners, such as the Georgia Center for Assessment through the University of Georgia and Certica, just to name a couple. We are currently partnering with our Cobb Virtual Academy team to ingest more than 30,000 assessment items they have access to through their online courses. Additionally, we are also in the process of ingesting assessment items from our adopted content providers, such as the science and social studies resources the board approved for purchase last spring and ELA prior to that. As we closely monitor our monthly usage of the assess portion of CTLS, it is worth noting that we have seen an increase in usage over the course of the last 2 years to more than 2 million individual administrations during the 17-18 school year, more than 500,000 than the previous year. The majority of these are not mandated assessments. Rather, they are teacher-selected assessments for the purpose of monitoring student progress and informing teaching and learning. For instance, this year, in the first 10 days of school, there were more than 3,300 assessments administered through CTLS Assess, a more than 40% increase from the previous year. What does this really mean? It suggests that since there were no district-mandated assessments required in the first 10 days of school, all 3,300 of these assessments were selected and or created by teachers to assess student knowledge and mastery of content standards as quickly as possible to better inform instructional decisions for our students. No longer do we need the whole first month of school or the first big test several weeks into the school year to get to know where our students are performing before we can begin to provide more personalized and differentiated instruction. We have the ability to know where our students are at any point in time and modify or adjust instruction accordingly. Teachers can use CTLS Assess for formative purposes such as pre-test or checkpoints along the way, as well as summative assessment. This versatility is critical and empowers teachers to utilize assessments for learning instead of always of learning. What's next for CTLS Assess? Based on teacher and leader feedback and requests, we are currently working on enhancements that would allow for technology-enhanced assessment item capability, as well as additional reporting functionality, just to name a few. We are excited to share these updates with the board once they become available. After the development of the assessment system, the district's next heavy lift was to ensure our teachers had a personalized digital environment that placed resources at their fingertips. We needed one central location for district-vetted resources. We needed to ensure our resources were aligned to the Cobb teaching and learning standards. We wanted a customizable dashboard for each teacher, an intuitive interface that required very little training to be able to navigate, and we wanted this resource to be accessible anytime, any place, and with any device. And we finally wanted to be able to deliver professional learning courses and collaborative communities through this system. So how do we bring this vision to life to impact teaching and learning? Let's just take a moment for a quick tour through CTLS and see how these pieces come together for one seamless experience that supports deeper student learning and engagement. Let's first head into CTLS Assess, since that was where this journey first began. For the record, I would like to point out that for the purposes of this presentation, I will be using a demonstration site that allows us to hide confidential student information, but does look and function just like the live one. In this instance, I'm a 6th grade math teacher, and I'm looking at the result of my student's last assessment. I would like to take a moment to introduce Stacy Buckaloo, our Supervisor of Digital Transformation, who has graciously agreed to drive during this demo. Stacy works closely in the development of CTLS, and I'm grateful for her assistance today. If you will first look and follow the mouse, we are going into our assessment of a 6th grade. We're going to click on Unit 4 Post-Test to see how my students have performed. We then click the button that says View Current Results and Data Analysis. I quickly learn that my class average may be a 78. That gives me a little bit of information about my teaching, how I thought my students were going to do, how they actually did, but it doesn't give me a lot of information about what to do on individual standards or for individual students. So the system allows me to dig a little deeper. We're going to dig into student level results. We select Teacher. We then click on Student Level Results, and then we click on Score Up. Notice at this point, you're starting to see individual students. If a student has a 70, I know they've mastered about 70% of the content, but it doesn't tell me of the other 30, where do I go back and fill in possible gaps, misunderstandings, something that they're missing. So while this information is useful, what it leads me to is to dig one step further. Finally, we're going to go by student and standard. We then select Stanley as our student, and then we select standards in the analysis bar. I now know Stanley's score on the test, but more importantly, I know exactly what he has mastered and what he hasn't. As you'll see from the screen, the bottom one, he's good to go. Those questions related to that standard, he showed mastery. The top one, we need a little work. So instantaneously, I'm able to prepare that in the morning when this student comes back to me, I'm able to pull him or a small group together to fill in whatever has transpired that left this an unmastered standard. Now, let's enter into the CTLS Teach interface, because once I know what my students need, where do I go to find the resources to provide that? What you see here is a quick overview of the dashboard. When a teacher signs in, this is my actual screen. This is what I see when I go in. You'll notice that it's my profile. If Stacy will mouse over, it'll show that it is me. It recognizes what my position is within this organization. So if I were, in this instance, I'm going to be an 8th grade science teacher. It pre-populates my courses that I serve that position in our district. If you'll notice, CTLS Assess is also a tab at the top, so the very system we were just in, you can toggle easily back and forth between those. The catalog is a place where you can view your courses, your communities, and your PL courses so that teachers can then customize. If I teach 8th grade science, physical science, let's say, and I decide that I'm going to work very closely with my colleagues on ELA standards, but I don't know those standards as well because I don't teach those. I can very easily go into this system, find the course whether it's the course before mine or after mine, or in this case, I'm 8th grade, I want to see the 8th grade ELA standards so that as I'm working on reading and writing and supporting those in nonfiction text, I know what those teachers are working on. So I'm able to add that course to my dashboard. And now when I log in the next time, it will already recognize and be there for me to reference. If you notice under My Classes, my class is populated according to the district role, as I just mentioned. You did see that I had 8th grade in there, and then I can go select PL courses on demand. You've heard our superintendent mention the days of sit and get for an hour at a time. Instead, we have modules. So if today I'm having a real hard time with guided reading groups, I'm able to go in and find professional learning that I can watch on demand. It may be a short clip, it could be a course that I choose to go through, but we're working very hard to increase the number of PL courses so that teachers have on demand what they need and it's differentiated. You also notice very quickly on the far right the announcements. Those are announcements based on communities that I'm involved in. I have assigned myself. It could be a community, could be a grade level. A community could be an entire school where an administrator could then send out an announcement. So I can sign up for whatever communities I choose to be in based on what my professional needs are. This is particularly helpful in courses like our CTAE courses where you may only have one culinary arts teacher. And so their ability to work with each other and to share resources and to have discussions is a bit more complicated. They now can belong to the culinary arts CTAE community and share resources and have a dialogue there. Finally, let's look at what a teacher sees when you go in. I'm sorry, Stacy, that's my fault. If you look under CCSD sites for easy access, what you're looking at here are a list of links of the resources we have that teachers customarily use that now have single sign-on capability. So if I want to go into Office 365 or look at my RI or MI data, or streaming Cobb, I no longer have to remember my username and password for all of these things. I'm already logged into the system. I click on that tile and it takes me directly into that resource. We provide a multitude of resources and subscriptions, but it's difficult for teachers to stop and remember that I need to go get my username and password in order to evaluate what's there. This puts it at their fingertips and takes an extra step out of the way. If we go into what a course looks like, we're going into 8th grade physical science. You'll notice that it is organized by course, unit, and a topic structure. That is intentional. All of our courses are organized that way so that as I move between courses or grade levels, I'm not having to learn a new organizational structure. They're all organized in this manner. You see on the landing page there that the frameworks are clearly listed, the standards for Cobb teaching and learning. The balanced instructional model is at their fingertips, and course resources. Notice if you go into course resources, it also includes single sign-on. So for example, in this case, under the board's leadership, we adopted new science resources. There are the teachers' resources where they're able to click and go there immediately and reference those very conveniently. If you go under unit, you'll see an overview with specific unit standards. And finally, you get down into topics, where a teacher would find essential questions, vocabulary, enduring understanding, and instructional components. But what happens when a teacher uses that and says, I like this piece, but I really am looking for something else. I know my students, and I am looking for a project. I'm looking for something hands-on. I'm looking for a video to supplement the instruction. I'm excited today to show you what we refer to as our resource library. Think of it as your traditional library where you went in and you checked out resources and you took what you needed and you left what you didn't. This is the same concept, it's just digital. So when we go into our resource library, you'll notice on the left-hand side are a list of providers. Those providers are Georgia Department of Education, Novation that we have a subscription to, Discovery Ed, could be any number of partners that we already have. Again, no username, no password needed, and notice there are over 400,000 resources in that resource library from kindergarten through 12th grade. The next thing I would point out is that all of those resources are tagged. You can filter them in a way that works best for you. If you want to filter them by grade level, if you want to filter them by topic, if you want to filter them by a specific grade level standard, you can sort them in any way that is most convenient for the user. So for instance, if we are going to search by a particular standard, in this case I want to look at S8P1.A, which for an 8th grade is natural resources. And I know the actual standard number. I can type that in. I could also type in natural resources. I could also type in 8th grade science and put the topic in there. But what happens when I do that is 499 resources immediately sort that are appropriate for that topic, that standard, and that grade level. There are different views available depending on what the user finds most helpful to them. They can use a list, a thumbnail, a larger thumbnail, whatever helps them to sort. They can also sort by relevance. If you know what's in there and you want to see just what's the newest that we've put in there, it'll sort by the newest. It'll sort by a rating or a review. But what happens when I have 499 resources? I don't have time to look through 499 resources, so we have what we kind of refer to as a baseball card. If you hover over the object, it will give you a snapshot of the type of resource, the picture, name, provider, rating, and grade. So for instance, this is Sunset in a Bag. And this happens to be a project, and I think that's exactly what I need for my class. So now what? I can either click, go to the resource, or I can see a full review, and it will take me to that resource in its entirety. I decide that I like it. How do I save it, or do I have to sort through this every single time I want to come back? Not at all. You actually get to create what we call a collection. Similar if you on your phone have a playlist for your music, similar concept to this. So we're going to add to a collection. We're going to choose add to a new collection. This one's going to, I choose to sort this one by my specific standard. So next year when I come back to it, I'll already have these resources at my fingertips, or I can add or edit it. We're going to title it Natural Resources, various resources for natural resources, or whatever description the teacher finds most useful. Grade is obviously the 8th. Subject is physical science. We're going to tell it to create a collection. And when you do, notice that the collection builder is now showing a new collection, tagged the way you chose to tag it. So here's the fun part. You now can continue to go through the other 498 objects. You can look at them as in-depth as you want, or I happen to know that I see one in there. And Stacy, if you'll just add it to my collection, you literally drop and drag it into your collection. Are teachers relegated to only what's in these Cobb vetted resources? Absolutely not. If you look up there, you'll also notice that you can upload a file from your desktop or your flash drive. So I've been teaching for a while. I love this particular activity. You may add it to it. You can also add an additional website through add a link. You can also edit your collection, and you can share your collection. So if I work at McClure Middle School in the 8th grade and I want to share it with my other 8th grade science teachers, it has the functionality to then go through that collection, and it's already set up in their queue. I do want to say this work is never done. We have 400, almost 50,000 objects. Mr. Ragsdale has set an expectation that we will have 1 million by December of this year, and that number will continue to grow from there. We have people constantly looking to curate additional content, and so we're excited about this. We are in the process of sharing this with schools in our proof of concept, getting feedback on functionality, and then we're ready to share it as a larger district as soon as that process is done. So the library resource is an exciting part of a new enhancement to CTLS.
So I don't know if y'all were taking wagers on how long I could sit here and not say anything. So, well, since she drug me into it by name, so I do want to sit here for just 1 second and hover on this, because what we're seeing again, CTLS is not something we went out and bought off the shelf. Okay, that's why we are being pinged by very, very large school districts across the country, from Miami-Dade to LA Unified to San Francisco, to come and see what we're doing, because literally no other school district in the country is doing what we're doing that you're seeing presented here today. So both from the board's perspective, as far as the way we acquire resources, we no longer go out and say, okay, we're going to adopt this set of books from this particular company, and we get all this nonsense that nobody wants and nobody uses, but it's free. So you take that in combination with taking all of the different technologies that we've been using, and we've married it into CTLS. She mentioned multiple times, I knew you caught on to it, about not having to log in to each system that we have married into CTLS. That is both a huge deal and also a huge lift. Both our internal technology personnel and our vendors that we have brought in to help with the programming and coding to make this possible, that's a huge lift to have single sign-on on every one of those systems. And I can't say enough, too, about the programs and the companies that represent, that are behind those programs, of working with us to be able to have behind the scenes access so that we can do that single sign-on. We can make the splash page and the landing page exactly what we need it to be. This is why, and I'm not going to steal all of Floresta's thunder, but this is why we keep saying, as we're talking about this assessment flexibility, too much focus is being placed on the assessment. More focus needs to be placed on improving academic achievement. And that's what we're doing with CTLS. Yes, we're saying to use CTLS as a replacement is not a good term for substitution is a better term for milestones, because as we're doing every single day, we're placing with CTLS the data in the hands of the teachers in the classroom to affect that change positively for each individual student based on the data that teacher is receiving. And then, well, that's great and wonderful, but if you're not providing the resources to the teachers to do something differently with those students that you've identified that maybe need some additional help or that are already accelerated past where you are, well, then that's a discredit to us, because we're not providing the necessary tools to the teachers to be able to make it to that next step. So when we talk about we're doing things in Cobb County School District and that no other school district is doing, that's kind of what we're talking about. Literally, it's not, we went out and bought this one package and that's what we're doing that nobody else is doing. We're actually combining all of the resources that we have invested millions of dollars in, from the technology that's running it behind the scenes, to the devices, to the infrastructure, to the resources that's been acquired that actually have been able to allow us to produce CTLS. So I could not say enough about the effort that has been produced by everyone that's been involved, especially internal. Because when we talk about having the right people in the right seat on the bus, that's where it becomes very, very important that we can create something like this, number one. But then number two, be open enough to, and I'll remind the board that as we were creating CTLS, we had it open so that the users, the teachers, could make recommendations, submit comments and input, and a lot of those comments and input that we received actually made it into production. So the teachers have had just as much of a hand in the creation of this system as anybody else, and that's very important when you're talking about. You've heard me use the analogy. When we first rolled this out, we weren't giving away ice cream. Nobody was lining up to say, hey, I want some of that. But when they see what the fruits of the labor can be once you get into the system, that's why, going back to the previous slides, when we talked about 3,300 tests were given in the first 10 days of school, that's over a 40% increase from this time last year. That's saying the teachers have bought in. They are actually utilizing the system exactly the way it was meant to be utilized, because they're seeing the data that they're receiving that then they're actually able to turn around and help those students from day one. When we talk about over 2 million assessments were given in an academic year that were not mandated, that's teacher buy-in. So teacher buy-in is just as important as you're rolling out an implementation of a system as the system itself. You can have the greatest tool in the world. If you don't have the buy-in of the teachers, they're not utilizing it, you've just wasted your money. So I did want to just speak to all of those angles because, again, we're getting a lot of attention across the country, as we should, but that's why we're getting that attention is these districts that are, huge districts in the country, as we are. We're in the top 25 as well. But they're seeing that we're doing something truly different that's impacting positively student achievement, and that's why we do it. So, all right, I'll try to be quiet for now.
Now that you've seen the current update and functionality of CTLS Assess and Teach, let's look at the next priority in this work. Next in the development is CTLS Parent. This work started last year with a focus group of parents from across the district. That group helped to identify key features, functionality, and resources that would be most beneficial to them in partnering with us to support their child's learning and development. Parents currently have access to the parent experience through Parent View. The information before you is critical information in the learning process. Attendance, class schedules, gradebook, athletic registrations, meal pay. We recognize the importance of having this information at their fingertips. But in the new CTLS parent experience, we're working closely with our existing partners and our technology division under the leadership of John Floresta to create a seamless integration of this information, plus the ability to provide searchable content for parents all through a single sign-on experience. This means parents log into the system one time and can access whatever they need without ever realizing they are actually toggling back and forth between our partners who support the various components of this experience. They will also be able to search digital content to help them support their child's learning and development. Ultimately, we are working with our partners to develop a recommendation engine that could use prescriptive analytics to recommend resources to teachers, students, and parents based on assessment data. We're currently in the rollout phase of CTLS Parent. As we have historically done, we are taking our time and getting it in front of parents so that we can solicit critical feedback from our stakeholders to ensure a smooth implementation district-wide. Finally, this brings us to CTLS Student, where we envision a virtual learning environment that supports both online and blended student learning experiences. This would include, but not limited to, utilization of prescriptive analytics to recommend suggested resources based on standard-specific data tied to our assessment system, learner profiles to support that data-driven instruction, collaboration between students and between student and teachers via this system, and personalization of student instruction. We're currently in the process of forming a task force designed to help us identify what features and functionality are most critical in this user experience. Students and teachers will be essential in informing this work, and it will likely look different depending on the developmental age of the student. In other words, the user experience for a primary age child is likely very different than that of a high school senior. We expect this work to accelerate next year based on our tentative timelines. Our district has been committed to the vision of the teaching and learning system for the last 8 years, but this work has also uniquely positioned us to leverage this system in applying for flexibility centered around state-mandated assessments. At this time, I would like to turn it over to John Floresta to provide an update related to this opportunity.
Good afternoon, Board. If it was up to me, you probably wouldn't be hearing from me. We'd just park right there and we'd just stare at that screen, hear about that tool, which I'm a tech guy. You could not get me much more excited than what I just saw right there, making a teacher's life more simple, more access to more information for students, for teachers, and ultimately for parents as well. I do want to frame my comments as an update on where we're at with the state assessment pilot in the context, though, of CTLS. CTLS, as you just saw, is a tool. It is a massive tool. It is a valuable tool. It takes 5, 10, 15 different tools and puts them into one place. It makes a teacher's life easier. But a tool, at the end of the day, is a tool. And we can talk as much as we want about more access to more information for teachers to make better decisions inside of classrooms. But if our system in education isn't aligned to what kids truly know, then a tool at the end of the day is just that. And the workaround assessment, of which I'll detail here momentarily, is the opportunity to align a tool that allows us to know more about our kids and for our teachers to actually act on it, and to do it in a way that takes away the current environment in which we live, in which our teachers are going down one road in where they know what's best for children. They have information at the tip of their fingers, and yet they can't act on it. They don't act on it, at least not as consistently as would like, because they're incentivized by the system to play what we call the game. And that's the idea of following milestone scores, which are provided to us at the end of the year after the kids are already outside of the classroom, that don't provide any instructional worth. And so what we're trying to solve for is to say, hey, we have a tool, that we have national interest, as the superintendent just echoed, but at the end of the day, a tool is just a tool, and if we don't put that in conjunction with and in partnership with aligning our system so that our teachers aren't going in two different directions, it won't be as effective as we want it to be. And so with that, through legislation led by former Cobb County board member, a man who's sat in your seat, Senator Lindsey Tippins, and the State Board of Education on September 26th as part of SB 362, the Cobb County School District formally applied for the state of Georgia's innovative assessment pilot. I'll brag on our superintendent because he probably won't do it for himself. He sat down at the state board and made a compelling case, not just for the value of the tool, but for the value for students inside of classrooms. Again, the idea that assessment shouldn't be of students, describing students after the fact. It should be assessment that's for students, that provides actionable information inside of the instructional day and year. The State Board of Ed unanimously approved Cobb's innovative assessment model the very next day on September 27th, which will be included as part of the state of Georgia's application for the federal assessment pilot. Our vision for innovative assessment is a model which we believe and we've been told could serve as a state and even national model. We can better support Cobb's teachers to know more about their students through increased local control of assessment and a system of formative assessment. That's one of those education buzzwords, so I'll say that in plain English. Formative assessment means frequent, shorter tests that provide more information more regularly for teachers. That's as simple as I can say it. And that system of assessments we're calling Cobb Metrics. It is powered through CTLS, and it gives teachers, as I said earlier, more information about their students on a regular basis. In fact, that access is immediate, not only to the teachers, but ultimately to parents. You just saw a screenshot there of CTLS Parent, which will be rolling out, at least in part, in January to a select number of schools. Cobb County School District's application with the state board was over 250 pages long, and so for the sake of your time, it is best summarized in this way. We're committed to assessment which allows teachers to align their time to what they know about students, not what's reported at the end of the year after students have already left their classrooms. We believe assessment should be, and Cobb Metrics includes, assessments which assess Georgia's academic standards, provide meaningful accountability through formative assessments administered through the academic year. Those scores would then roll into a summative score for the purpose of accountability. We believe in assessments which demonstrate mastery of individual standards for each student, which allow teachers to administer those assessments according to a schedule that fits the needs of their students, not a testing calendar prescribed by someone else. We also are including nationally normed assessments. The next step in the process includes the state of Georgia submitting an application with the U.S. Department of Education with an alternative assessment model for the entire state of Georgia. The state superintendent recently released a press release defining the state of Georgia's vision for assessment, and that vision is defined very closely to ours. It talks about assessment being for students, not of students. Talks about student success not being able to be defined by a single test score. And we believe that our assessment philosophy is very closely married with the intent, at least as it's described by the state superintendent, even this week. The state of Georgia will be submitting a state application with the U.S. Department of Education by December 17th. If submitted by then, we anticipate federal approval as the final step for approval of Cobb metrics by mid-winter. While CTLS and our assessments are certainly ready for delivery now, it's important, particularly for our staff and for our families, to understand that we would not be implementing Cobb metrics as a replacement for milestones, or I'll use the word substitution, as the superintendent echoed, in Cobb County until the fall of 2019 at its earliest. Federal process would then give us 5 years to prove Cobb metrics to be the state and national model, which turns assessments into a tool, again, used by teachers to affect positive change in instruction for each and every student in Cobb County. I'm sure you may have questions. My hope was to be able to give you an overview both of how the tool fits into the assessment work. I certainly could say more about it, but I'll be glad to field any questions you might have of myself or our Chief Academic Officer, who's not in the room at this time.
Let me go first. They talk about that text I just...
Why don't you let David Morgan go first? All right. We'll go to the left this time.
Appreciate
Mr.
it.
Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Banks, and Mr. Scamahorn. Go ahead, Mr. Morgan.
Appreciate it. The part of the presentation that I saw was excellent, and I know that it was very thorough. I want to look at this from a parent's perspective. Right now, I have a 6th grader, right? Let's say she takes an assessment, and let's say that it says she made a 78. I mean, well, I don't know. Just would I, as a parent, be able to say, Layla Morgan, I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to see what standards you mastered, where you need some more help. And will I also have resources at my disposal that I can go in and target that particular thing that she might not. For example, in her class right now, she's working on expressions and exponents. So would I be able, as a parent, be able to look at that and say, we need a little bit more help on that particular thing. And I will also have the resources at my disposal. I don't have to wait on a teacher. I don't have to send an email. Right then I can, if I so desired, help my daughter.
All right, so the short answer to that is yes. But I want to say how much there is behind the scenes to that answer being yes. Okay. Because CTLS Parent is being implemented as we speak. And that's not going to be a flip of a switch and tomorrow it's implemented. But ultimately, exactly what you just said, you as a parent log in, you see all of your students, if you have more than one, the information. You're going to have access to not all of the information that the teachers have, but a large portion of the same data that the teacher has, such that you as a parent understand where your child is, where they need some help on. The big lift is the analytics behind what I'm about to say, and that is, as a parent, based on the data for your individual student, here are some suggested resources that you can use as a parent with your child at home for the areas in which they need help. We're not going to be, okay, your child has got, here are some resources to use in all 6 classes with your child. It's not a shotgun approach. It's going to be based on analytics behind the scenes that are making those suggestions. And those resources are either owned by us, the district, or they're available free online, and we already have those linked and tagged within CTLS. So yes is the short answer, but there's a lot of heavy lifting going on to make that possible. And ultimately, we want to get the appropriate attention to that such that the entire community understands what a tremendous asset they have as parents. Not just in that within the classroom, the teachers have a tremendous tool, but also we're rolling it out to parents as well, and then ultimately students.
Yes, I mean, that is, that's mind-boggling. Like, that's ultimately that. I think again, if you have a phenomenal teacher, then you want to keep that teacher. But if you have someone that's hit or miss, then you could, as a parent, you can leverage that access at home and still do your part in terms of what your child
Well, but not that
needs
we
to
have
know.
teachers that are hit or miss. All of our teachers are awesome.
Chris,
So when
Chris.
you have that great teacher, though,
Chris,
you're going to be able as a parent to have those resources
undoubtedly.
regardless.
Yes, yes. Right. I know, right? The second part of it that I want to know is we're rolling out parent as a proof of concept. No, this
We're rolling it out.
okay. I heard proof of concept was something. Didn't I hear proof of concept?
Making that up. You just make stuff up.
Didn't I hear proof of concept? I didn't hear it. We about to roll something out.
At different times, like proof of concept will come with student, but we actually have it built and we have it in some schools,
Okay.
and we're working out to make sure that it is a smooth before we go district-wide.
Gotcha. Okay, I think I'm really clear. I want to thank both of you. We had lunch the other day, John, and I really appreciate you really flushing out the assessment part of it, the Cobb metrics part of it. So, I mean, I'm proud as a peacock, man. And
It really is cool.
but this is the thing, Chris. I really want to thank you for leveraging how powerful technology can be if infused correctly in education. As you said before, we weren't selling ice cream or something, right? But I was recently talking to a principal at a school, and the principal was saying that, oh no, they took off a one-pager in terms of the adherence to CTLS. So that lets me know that it's cultural. This is not a hit or miss, or if you feel like it. And I think when it becomes cultural, then that's when you really see the return on investment. So I really appreciate it, and you answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. CTLS is kind of like a Snicker bar. It looks appetizing. It tastes good. I'm going to send you to the detention hall. And when you get through eating it, you want more. The presentations have been great in the past, and then today's also. Got quite a few questions on this. One of them is, are the assessments in CTLS, is it like the traditional assessments that we used to use with paper and pen in the classroom?
That's a great question, Mr. Banks. And actually, the answer would be yes and no. It could be if a teacher, based on how you and I sat and took a 20-question, 30-question test with paper and pencil, if a teacher chose to create one that they wanted to take that way as more of a summative, they could. But the versatility of this system is that a lot of times when you heard us reference the 2 million assessments, teachers will say, hey, I want you guys to answer these 2 questions as you walk out today when the bell rings. And using our iRespond system, it's immediately scored, and the teacher is able to see. We often refer to them as almost theirs. Like the teacher really does feel like I've taught it and you're almost there and you should have a pretty good handle on it. So they can give it 1 question. They could give 2 or 3. They could give a more traditional 25 or 30, depending on how they want to utilize it. And that's the amazing difference in this assessment system, is that it doesn't always have to be of learning. It's for learning, and I can give it as a pre-test and a post-test. I could just give it in a couple questions along the way and see how my students are doing, and then I immediately am able to change the path of my instruction based on what I find from those assessments.
Is this like the old pop test that we used to have? You know, a teacher would present a topic, and then we'd have a pop quiz.
I think those are punitive, and these oftentimes are formative, and so they're not necessarily for a grade. It's the teacher wants to know, I think my class has this, and I'm really checking on my effectiveness as a teacher. Did they understand it? So there's nothing punitive when teachers use it that way. It's not a grade in the grade book necessarily. It's just a quick pulse check so the teacher knows best how to respond to a student's needs.
Okay, if I understand CTLS and what it does is, even though an assessment may be a couple of questions or it could be several questions, but it's real time. And,
Yes, sir.
and the results are real time. So the teacher's not having to go down and grade 100 tests during the day for all the different classes.
Yes, sir. And
It's instantaneous almost.
And that was one of the other critical components is teachers only have so many hours during the day, and we would all agree their plates are more than full. And so if we can find a way to leverage technology so that they're not spending as much time grading papers, instead that's at their fingertips, they actually can divert that time to the relationships with the kids and planning, engaging in personalized and differentiated instruction. So that's one of the wins for the teacher in this system as well.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about assessments and maybe 70% had the knowledge and 30% did not, so you can take corrective actions. But you didn't say at what point do you move on? Is it 70%, 75%, 80%, 90%? I don't think it'll ever be 100%, but at some point you have to say, we're moving on.
And you're absolutely right, Mr. Banks. The wonderful thing about this is it doesn't mean we're going to stop the learning or slow anybody down. It could mean that tomorrow morning when the bell rings before school actually gets started, I'm going to pull these 2 or 3 students who may have missed 70% or 30%, and I'm just going to work on those 1 or 2 things with them. And that may only take 5 or 10 minutes to clarify misunderstanding. But instruction continues to move on. We look for other opportunities through guided reading, guided math. A lot of our schools have things like a Hoya block at Harrison where they have a designated amount of time that they may use some of that information to provide children that accelerated intervention. Or to be very honest, let's not forget to provide the enrichment. These same assessments tell us where kids have mastered things, and we don't need to hold them back. So how do I leverage what you saw today to look at the standards that I could actually be challenging my students with when they have mastered a grade level standard?
Okay. You mentioned that we're using several vendors to make CTLS viable. How do we verify the validity of the data that's being incorporated in the CTLS, and are we working with public, what we used to say, the publishers? Are they doing the same thing for us? How's our relationship with our vendors? Where are we getting this data and how valid is it?
Well, it depends on which data you're referring to, but for instance, the assessment items come from industry-leading partners. For example, the Georgia Center for Assessment is based out of the University of Georgia, so we know those assessment items have been vetted. They are statistically valid and reliable. And then we do work very closely with our vendors. I think one of the important things to note about this process is we really did do an industry analysis to look and see if there were resources out there that we could purchase off the shelf. And if somebody was already doing exactly what we needed them to do, we would have purchased it. And it wasn't. We were going to have to compromise and have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And to our superintendent's point, we went and found vendors who were willing to listen to what we needed and remain in a partnership with us. No longer is it the day, some of you may remember, where you got textbooks every 6 or 7 years and everybody was interested in having a relationship until those purchase orders were cut, and then you didn't find those vendors for a few years. These vendors are with us day in and day out. We have project managers from those vendors who actually are assigned to Cobb County to help us in that development. So yes, sir, the data that we've got and the resources that we're getting from these vendors is vetted, it's high quality, and we have an analysis system that allows us to go back and check and make sure that what we're seeing is accurate.
Let me add on to that too, because getting down into the technology is kind of where you're headed. So as we're designing and developing a system, we have to make sure we're the second largest district in the state. We got to make sure it scales. right? We can't roll it out to 3 schools and then roll it out district-wide and it fail because we've not designed it properly technologically. It doesn't have the horsepower to go where we want it to go. I've used this example in presentations that we've made to the state board and to state committees, and I'll throw it out here for you guys. Those of us that's been around for a minute in education in Georgia, every single statewide implementation technologically has had one point of failure, and that was scalability. If you remember, about, I don't know how long it's been, 15 years ago maybe, maybe less, maybe more, the state was going to have a statewide payroll system that every school district was going to use. They were going to create it, and update it from the state, and it's all going to be great. And they ran pilots in about 3 different districts, and everything was going good until it came time to print checks, and nobody could print checks, which is kind of a key component to a payroll system. And the reason was scalability. So when we built this system, we built it using industry standards, best practices. Some of the engineers that were working on it were actually the creators of a little program called Lending Tree. You might have heard of that online. So this is a system built on today's technology. It's built for big data. That's a new catchphrase in technology and databasing and data terms. But we built this system with the future in mind. We were building this before this flexibility assessment model ever was thought about, before legislation existed. But what we have to do is to make sure, to your point, we got to make sure that what we're going to put out there is valid and reliable. So from a technology perspective, that's kind of what's gone into under the hood, into the horsepower of what we've got, which is why when we present to the state about why this is a very viable solution for the state is because it's already been built. Again, I think too much focus is being placed on the assessment, whether that be milestones or a replacement for milestones. I think what we're trying to change the conversation of is what we want to do is give the teachers a tool to be able to increase student achievement in every classroom across the state. We have a chance and an opportunity that we've never had before as a state, and that is to be the leader in education instead of being, the tail on the dog of education. We're 38th in this and we're 48th in that and this kind of thing. Mr. Chastain forwarded an article, I think, to all you guys talking about if you strip off all of the fallacies about how we rank schools and states in education. I believe Georgia was number 7 or 5.
5 and 7.
5. Okay. So when you talk about things like that, we have a tremendous opportunity as a state to be a leader in education, and I think it's incumbent upon us that if we feel like we've got something to throw out there, it's going to be beneficial that we do that.
Okay. That kind of leads me into another question. You talked about standards, Georgia standards, and the resources that we use and accumulated to teach those standards. How do we determine the value of this a resource for a particular subject? Do we have a process that we go through?
As far as our district adopted resources, yes, sir. It is a very strenuous and a very lengthy process. It starts with a needs analysis. We never go into it thinking we have this much money to spend and let's spend it. We actually start by saying, where are our science resources? We'll use that as an example, seeing that was one of our recent adoptions. So we pull together teachers from every school, every grade level, every course, to really do a deep dive into the needs analysis. What do we have that we might have purchased several years ago that is still fitting the need of high quality, effective instruction? And where are we really lacking some resources so that we can make sure when we enter into that process of really identifying which resources, we make sure to put the ones at the top that are of greatest need per our teachers' input. So we go through a very rigorous process, and I'll be happy to sit down and share with you. We have it mapped out, and it's one that we replicate each time we begin looking at a new content acquisition process.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about the parents being involved in the CTLS process. How will the parents know what is actually being taught in the classroom?
Well, part of the vision is that the CTLS parent experience will be able to deliver the specific Cobb teaching and learning standards to a parent. So one of the things that's unique about what we're working on is some push and pull technology, meaning we want parents to be able to go online, and they can do that now. They can access the particular course or grade level that their student is enrolled in, and they can find those customized Cobb teaching and learning standards on our district website. But we're looking to make that more efficient in the new parent experience, where when I log in, and if I have a student in AP Calculus, the system automatically recognizes me. They recognize which students are attached to me, and they deliver to me in my parent experience. I would be able to log on, and there are my customized Cobb teaching and learning standards for AP Calculus for one of my children. So that's the first thing, is making it a little bit more accessible and pushing that information out to parents instead of always relying on them having to go find it. Part of what Mr. Morgan had referenced is that prescriptive analytics. We first want to have a resource library for parents, so all of the data or all of the learning objects that you saw in that resource library, part of the strict tagging we have is to tag it as to whether it's an appropriate parent resource, is it an appropriate student resource, or teacher. Some content is all three. Some of it wouldn't be appropriate in a parent's hands because they might not know what to do with it, and some of it might not be appropriate for a student unless a teacher has facilitated it. So we tag it that way. We want parents to be able to search it, but ultimately we want to have a recommendation engine so that when you take that test, using Mr. Morgan's example, and Layla misses 2 standards, the system is able to determine these 2 standards we didn't do so well, and it goes into our resource library and it searches for content at that grade level, that standard, that might be helpful to a parent, and it then delivers it into the student's experience, it delivers it into the parents, and it even delivers it to the teacher. The teacher doesn't have to use that. The teacher may know of something different he or she wants to do. But it's all about making the time that we do have more efficient so that students get that personalized and differentiated instruction that they so desperately need.
You mentioned the community earlier. Do you have any plans to have a roadshow for the community to understand what CTLS is all about and how to use it, and how to, like you just mentioned, how do you help your student or your child master something that they have a deficiency in? Are we going to have something going out into all the communities that gives a concept of what's going on?
Well, we haven't gotten that far, but I would dare say the answer is absolutely yes. Whether that's in person or whether we leverage the social media that Mr. Floresta and his team, we want to make sure that parents can access at any time, any place when they want it. And that might be on their couch at 11 o'clock at night when they've taken care of all their other responsibilities and have a chance to actually leverage it. So absolutely, once we get to that point, is we will have a very strategic plan about what kind of resources are out there to make sure parents are aware of what's available to them and how do we support them in using it.
I want to change subject a little bit and get more into the Cobb metrics. Is the state planning on submitting one model, or will there be multiple models? Are there other districts that are submitting different models for federal approval?
Yeah, so as you referenced, we are one of 3 assessment models which have been approved by the state process. We anticipate, and in fact we know, we will be part of the state's application which will be submitted to the federal government for approval. It's an interesting question because based on our understanding, and I wouldn't just say ours, I would say based on informed parties who have told us the federal process certainly intends for there to be one model. It is our understanding currently that there will be a submission of multiple models, as to answer your question precisely. What that means exactly in terms of reception at the federal level, I can tell you what we've been told. I can also tell you that there's some differing opinion on that. And so we know that our model would be submitted as part of a federal application, and we know currently the intent of Georgia Department of Education is to submit multiple models.
It's my understanding that from a federal standpoint, their model is for assessments is MAP, the measure of academic progress. Right now, that would be what would be implemented in every school district. What we're doing is we're asking a variance from that. Can you briefly tell us what the differences would be between MAP and Cobb metrics?
Sure, and just to be clear, MAP is one of the other 3 applicants which have been approved at the state level. MAP is a national vendor who produces a nationally normed test, which means it compares students according to national standards. They use something called a growth model. It's currently used across the country. It's interesting that they're part of this conversation at the state level, of course, because for a state assessment, you need to be aligned to state standards. And so they are one of the models that have been approved at the state process, along with another consortium of districts who are using a system called NAVI. But to speak to your specific question, MAP is a nationally aligned assessment designed by a vendor, very similar maybe to Iowa in terms of comparison. And I would say they're very different from ours. I'll just say it that way. I won't say better or worse, but I'll just say different, and you can fill in the blanks. I think I'll speak to ours definitively. We are a locally designed, not only platform in partnership with industry-leading partners, but we also have locally submitted content that's been designed here at the local level. It's aligned to Georgia standards for Georgia teachers, for Georgia students. And I think that is certainly a distinct factor when you're looking at us and the other models, particularly MAP.
Last question. Let's assume that the federal government gives us permission to use Cobb metrics, and the state says, okay, we're going to use Cobb metrics, or it may not be called Cobb metrics, but whatever it is. When would the changes go into effect, and when will we no longer be required to administer the milestones?
Yeah, at its very earliest, the fall of 2019. We anticipate the federal process to take certainly into the winter. There's not a definitive timeline from the federal government, but generally speaking, they respond within 120 days, and we anticipate that process to hold. So at the very earliest, the fall of 2019. We have submitted as part of our state plan a timeline which indicates a year of planning, which is this year that we're currently in, with the beginning of implementation of fall of 2019. I think let's just say we're going to be aggressive about it. If at the end of the day, if we have good information, better information for our teachers to put in their hands so they know more about kids, we want that to happen as fast as humanly possible.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scamhorn, question?
I think I do. John, I'll start with you, but the superintendent may want to jump in on this. Rather than the content of the program, I want to talk about the program. What platform are we using? Or are we using a platform? Is this thing right on top of Windows or something like Java or what?
CTLS itself or Cobb
Yes.
metrics? I'm sorry. So
Well, you can address both, but I'm talking CTLS.
Sure. So Cobb metrics itself is really the assessment model. And that assessment model is being delivered through a platform. And that platform is CTLS. CTLS is a software that's web-based. It's a combination. I'll give you the tech term that you'll probably appreciate. There's the idea of a monolithic structure, which means there's this one big software application, or there's the idea of partnering with the best in brands, and that's the concept that you heard from Jennifer earlier. So the layman's way of saying that is there isn't really one application, because what we've done is we've pieced together the very best, and we've created something that didn't exist. So I hope that spoke to your question.
Are we getting down to the level where we have are people writing code for this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, over the course of the last 8 years, you have to remember this has been a vision really over the course of the last almost decade now. And so certainly, I mean, there are large portions which have been written from ground up internally. There are portions which have been pieced together from best in brand partners.
And how?
Let me try to give let me rewind just to give kind of a 100,000-foot view of this. So when we first rolled out iRespond, which is the student response system, iRespond has its own software. So if you just said, we want to put out some student response systems, we've chosen iRespond, here you go, teachers, here's the software, here's some PL to go with it. Teachers could individually use that software to create assessments and kind of do what we're doing now on their own individually. We saw the benefit and we knew where we wanted to be, but that really wasn't going to fit the bill. So then we started looking at different types of software and systems that could administer electronically assessments. And so that's when we got with AssessTracks. And so AssessTracks, their biggest market was a school district that wanted to administer assessments via bubble sheets. Okay, and so then AssessTracks would do an analysis of those bubble sheet results and then give you the data affiliated with those. So what we started doing was working with these different products to say, look, we want to use iRespond with AssessTracks, and instead of using a bubble sheet, we want to use a student response system to be able to administer electronically an assessment and then have that data immediately consolidated and disaggregated at the same time for teachers to be able to access. And so we started doing a lot of that programming, if you will, in-house in our technology services department. So we quickly outgrew that. And so that is what kind of started the snowball rolling downhill, if you will, to get us to today. So we started very small and very siloed, if you will, and then we started to try to connect the different silos. And then today, so to your point about do we have people writing code, we've got people writing a lot of code that are marrying these systems behind the scenes. And again, it's truly a team effort, because without the various systems and the companies that own those systems being willing to work with us to have those connections made, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing and what we've created. So I give you that quick history lesson because it literally started with a piece of hardware that had some software with it, and we kind of said, okay, we need to stretch ourselves with this, and that's how we've gotten to CTLS.
And I appreciate the review. That helps. Where I want to go with it is, John said we have 10 years, 6 to 10 years. I'm aware of 7 anyway. I'm also aware of the response. iRespond's been around for 20 years, maybe, whatever, 15.
No, it's less than 10.
Okay. So we're putting in a lot of manpower, a lot of our own innovation, a lot of our money, time. Are we, and then you also said that a lot of systems are inquiring and they've learned about it, I assume, maybe through the other vendors, if not us. But how do we secure our investment? Are we just going to invest all of this, all the resources we're talking about right now, and just give it away?
Yeah, so that's a great question and a very complex question. I think that
you want me to send out for pizza?
Yeah, exactly. I think the complexity comes into we don't know what we don't know. So as the state is constructing the application that they're going to submit to the federal level, assuming that we're part of that, assuming the federal level approves it, now there's all of these things. Okay, now what? What does that mean? Is there funding affiliated with that to grow it? Because obviously, there's got to be additional assessment items. The infrastructure would have to be built out in various districts for them to be able to take advantage of it. So I think that the way that we look at the initial investment and the ongoing investment that we have made and will continue to make is simply for Cobb County. It's to benefit the students of the Cobb County School District. Looking forward, we're looking to expand who can have access to our system anyway, regardless of SB 362, regardless of the federal pilot program. So that being said, that's kind of one path. A separate but concurrent and parallel path is this pilot application. What does that look like? Well, we don't know what we don't know yet. Another separate but concurrent and parallel path is okay, there are still, with SB 362, SB 362 is obviously state legislation specific to Georgia. Well, part of that legislation says that if a district submits a proposal to the state and the State Board of Education approves it, then the State Department of Education will then go out by order of the legislation and attempt to get waivers to allow the district's proposal to be put into implementation. So we've got three separate paths here. The last path with the waiver would be simply for Cobb County School District. That would allow us to not administer milestones, but do our system that is specific just to Cobb. That's not part of the federal pilot program. Now, all of that being said, ultimately, the Federal Department of Education is expecting a one solution per state for assessing. So a lot of the questions come about, and matter of fact, I got this question Monday. Well, what are you going to do? This sounds great, but what are you going to do for nationally normed assessing? Well, we're going to continue to do Iowa. We're going to continue to have ACT, SAT, PSAT. But that being said, that's kind of that question becomes moot, because ultimately when you get to the end of the process, whatever state's solution has been created is going to be then the nationally normed assessing to be compared, because that's what the federal government Federal Department of Education is looking for. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. That's the complexity of your question. No, we're not going to just give away what our investment has done or has been invested in, but the way that I think the best way to look at that is we have made this investment for the students and teachers of Cobb County School District, and if our model, our system can be used as a state model, I think it's incumbent upon Cobb County School District to step up to the plate to allow Georgia to again be a leader, not again, to finally be a leader in education to the rest of the country. So I hope that answers kind of the question.
Yeah, and I didn't know if I was going to open up that can of worms for you, but I don't regret it. So what you're really saying is, well, my sense is, and I don't know if a government organization as a school district can copyright or patent something, but what I'm hearing you say is that we're willing to do this for the prestige and to the leadership, and I don't say that in a negative way. And I agree with what you said about stepping up and being a leader. But my thought is we're putting in a lot of effort and a lot of money and a lot of innovation only just to be a charity and give it away.
Can I just speak to that for a second? I think, as the superintendent said, the investment of time, money, energy, and resource is certainly worth it because it's worth it for 113,000 kids and their families. But we are certainly open to partnering with anybody if it makes sense. What does "if it makes sense" mean? Is what I hear really the question that you're asking. And
yeah, I'm not.
We don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, I'm not questioning the value because our kids are invaluable.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is not only for them, but also for efficiency.
Yeah.
So that's not a question about that. I'm looking at the alternative or the byproduct, not the alternative. The byproduct is, can we help ourselves from a financial point of view? And if we can't, that's fine. Sure. Again, I'm just...
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be monies involved from the federal level should we be part of that solution. I think, though, that to answer your question, kind of flip it on its side, is that's what makes our proposal so much different than the others, because one of the others is basically a vendor. Actually, both of the other two are basically vendors. One is an established vendor. One is a new one that's looking to your point, make a buck on the system. Mm-hmm. We have invested money already to create the system because it's the right thing to do for Cobb County School District students and teachers. So I think that's what positions us to be in a better position because, again, we're not looking to make a buck on what we're trying to do. We're simply trying to put the state of Georgia in the leadership role of education for the nation.
Yeah, I want to be very clear, too, and maybe I'm being a little too defensive here. I'm not discussing otherwise or that we shouldn't. Absolutely. I'm just trying to figure out, okay, can we get something else out of it? And what you're saying is true. I agree with. Okay. And since you mentioned you talked to the state, I circled on the last, took it down on the last page there, the model for the state's innovative assessment pilot, and then bold says federal assessment pilot. You couldn't get those folks to say, hey, proof of concept. We don't use that word. Did you not? Okay.
It's hard to get the feds to do anything that
okay.
It's different than what they want to do.
A couple other micro questions. On the, let's see here, I marked it somewhere. Here we go. On page 4, and it mentions over 2 million individual administrations during the 2017-18. You're familiar with that? You see that? Could you clarify and define for what you mean by administrations? Does that mean inquiry?
Yeah, let me jump on that because one of the things that we want to be careful with, as Mr. Banks's point, communicating with the community, is the community is some parents are very concerned with too much assessing, right? That's where kind of the too much assessing route is going. So when people hear 2 million individual administrations, basically it's administration of assessment, okay? But these are non-mandated assessments. So these may be the 2 or 3 question pretest, and then the 2 or 3, 4, 5 question post-test to make sure of the comprehension level of the lesson that the teacher is taught. So that's what's meant by the 2 million. And again, good assessing is required in education. So we're not trying to say we need to do more assessing. What we're trying to say is the assessing that we do has to be focused on moving student achievement.
So thank you for the clarification. So really that's an indication, that's sort of the cherry on top of the whipped cream of the sundae, is if we've got 2 million applications of what the students know, then teacher buy-in, they've got to be, there's, I don't know, multi-millions of going into CTLS to see what's there, how do I use it, whatever. Right. Okay. Which brings me to my next question is, Jennifer, you mentioned that if I did a lesson and I wanted to share it with somebody on the other side of the county, I could move it from one bar or one window to the next.
Click and drag?
Drag, right.
Drag and
Okay,
drop.
but that was my lesson. Do I have authorship, or can the next person change it unknown to me?
Well, if you're picking one out of the resource library and you're going to drop it in there, once it goes into your collection, you can modify it and take notes based on the needs of your students. But of course, it remains unedited in the resource library.
Okay,
So
so
even
it
though I've
becomes a
dropped it-
copy
Yes, sir.
where I can do essentially like equivalent to pen and ink.
Yes, sir.
Change for myself then. Okay. I think I had another question, but you've given me so much good information, I'm not sure I can find it or remember now.
And Mr. Board Chair, Mr. Superintendent, if you would indulge me for a moment, one thing I failed to do was to recognize the incredible hard work Mr. Ragsdale mentioned, being a team approach. This has been a priority, as clearly indicated by the superintendent, so it is reflected across our divisions. We have some that are here today that really do head up this work. John and I just have the privilege of sharing the narrative with you today. But Kelly Metcalf, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Janelle McClure, our Director of Digital Multimedia, Stacy Buckaloo, our Supervisor for Digital Transformation, and Lori Horn, our Director of Assessment Personalized Learning, Isan Katula in the Accountability Division, Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Mark Smith, our Senior Executive Director of Technology Services, and his team, Herb Ague, the Director of Technology Program Management, Ryan Pines, Director of Student Information, Kristen Kennedy, Director of Instructional Technology, and Director of Cobb Virtual Academy, Ryan Fuller. It truly takes the brain power of all of these individuals and their expertise to figure out how we bring this vision to life. It doesn't exist anywhere else, so it is an exciting time. It's exciting work, and we appreciate the superintendent and the board allowing us the space for this work.
Okay. Oh, and let me just reinforce that. Thank you to all of you. And it's really aside to what I was asking too, is there's a lot of folks behind the curtain doing a lot of things and really rowing the boat. So thank you all. It's great work. And Mr. Chair, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skimhorn. With that, thank everybody out there that's worked on this. We're going to take a 10-minute break and we'll come back at 4:30.
Thank you, ma'am.
We're good. Welcome back. We're reconvening. And we have the superintendent's report, the Grand Fund
Yes, sir.
financial statement.
Mr. Chair,
Ragsdale?
members of the board, I'm going to ask Brad Johnson to come and bring the financial pro forma statement.
Good afternoon, Board. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the Board, Mr. Superintendent. As in previous years, we are presenting today a pro forma financial statement to estimate where we are financially as a school district at the end of the fiscal year on June 30th, 2018, since we don't complete the audit until December. Later in January or February this fiscal year, we'll present the external audit to the Board, and we'll let you know our final numbers as of June 30th and the accuracy of our estimates at that time. The accounting department, under the direction of Jan Hendricks, has worked very hard to close out the school district accounting records and the books as of June 30th, 2018. Right now, she's in the middle of coordinating the completion of this audit. Closing the financial books is quite a challenge every year when we consider that the budget is in excess of now almost $1.1 billion. Jan and all of her staff working in the accounting department is one of those behind-the-scenes departments of the school districts that's so crucial to financially supporting our teachers and classrooms. And I want to thank her and her staff. I have placed a copy of the pro forma financial statement at your desk for your review. The statement continues to use the same format that we have presented for several years. On the left side of the report in column A, you can see actual revenue and expenditure numbers for FY 2018 with an ending unassigned fund balance in excess of $109 million. CCSD board policy states that we strive to have at least a 1-month reserve target of general fund expenditures. Our most recent calculation of a 1-month reserve target is $99 million, so we are currently slightly above this figure, and our projections continue to be accurate within percentage points. When the annual independent audit is completed by our external auditors, we'll present the final numbers after the first of the year. Now, with regard to fund balance, please continue to keep in mind that the leading government accounting organization in the United States, the GFOA, or Government Finance Officers Association, as well as the district's current financial auditors, Maudlin and Jenkins, recommend that the general fund should maintain a 2-month fund balance reserve. On the right side of the report, we have continued to present a variety of financial information that is relevant to our financial status, which includes our general fund financial safety net, a continuation of no long-term debt, and budget data and comments. And I can just run through those very quickly for you. In section B at the top in the middle, you can see our financial safety net. We currently have a general fund millage rate of 18.9 and the cap is at 20. So an estimate of a 1.0 mil would be $25.1 million. An estimated value of 1.1 mils would be about $27.6 million. Unassigned fund balance is, as of June 30th, 2018, is $109 million. So that board, that is our financial safety net for the district. This safety net is relatively small, considering that we do not know the economy, what the economy might look like in out years. Exactly to the right of that is section C, our debt service section. We currently have no long-term debt, and we haven't had any long-term debt since 2007. And then finally in section D, we have various FY19 and FY 2020 budget metrics and considerations. You can see in number 1, I've listed out the Georgia austerity budget cuts, and you can see in FY 2019 for the current year we don't have any more austerity cuts, but I thought it was important for you all to know, for y'all to see what we've been through and to see the cumulative figure that we've endured austerity cuts since 2003 of over $586 million. Section number 2, property value digest growth. Digest growth, as you can see in the chart, is definitely trending in a positive direction. And you can see if you go back to 2008 and then follow it up through all 2018 digest, you can see how the digest is starting to grow, and it's a very nice trend. and we hope that trend continues. For every percentage increase in the digest that we experience, we get an additional $4.5 million in extra revenue. Section number 3, the financial impact of 1%. You all hear me talk a lot about financial estimates and the importance of how close our estimates are right now. And if I'm off by 1% of revenue and expenditures, that's off by over $21 million. So when we make our estimates, we continue to be conservative because if we're going to be off, we want to be off in the right way. Section number 4 is our credit rating summary. You can see here that we currently maintain a AAA credit rating from Moody's Investor Service, and we also currently maintain a MIG-1 short-term credit rating from Moody's Investor Service. What this means is that the district continues to be in an elite financial status compared to most other U.S. districts. And also on the large corporations, where only 2 non-financial companies now have AAA ratings, Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson. So we're in some very good company in terms of credit rating. Moody's just issued their annual issuer comments on October 8th. And just a brief summary, they give a whole report on our school district, but their brief summary says that the Cobb County School District has an extremely strong credit position, and its AAA rating far surpasses the median of all AAA school districts nationwide. So we're in a very nice position. The key credit factors include an extensive tax base, positive wealth, income profile, and a very solid financial position. So that was very nice to hear. When we work on our short-term credit or short-term note next month in December when we meet, we'll be evaluated by Moody's again, a full-blown evaluation. So I think we're in good shape there. In Section 5 in the metrics on your report, I've listed the 5 mil share, and you can see how the local fair share continues to go up. So it went from 144 in 2018 to the current year of $155 million. And then finally, in Section 6, the Cobb County School District exemptions, the age 62, has been going up steadily. From 2016, it went up $11 million. The previous year, it went up $11 million. And then this past year, went up almost another $11 million. So that's more information that we need to keep in mind as we work on the budget. Some comments about the budget. As I've stated many times, we have 2 sources of general fund revenue, state revenue and local revenue. I'm currently analyzing the economic environment, trying to understand some type of trend line into the future. In contrast to financial environments in previous years, it's extremely difficult to establish financial trends for our district, which makes it harder and harder to compile revenue and expenditure estimates. What I am seeing now is we might have an issue with state QBE revenue for the upcoming budget. The major metric surrounding this revenue is student counts and growth in student counts. Our student count has currently leveled, which means we will not experience significant growth. In contrast to growth that we've had in past years, it could be as high as $10 million. So that's something that we need to be aware of. Also, concurrently with that, we seem to have a growing state 5 mil share. So that's all combined into state revenue. So when we have flat growth and then an increased local fair share, that leads me to believe that state revenue might be flat. So that's something that we'll need to understand as we go into the budget. On the other hand, we see growth in local revenue. We see increased home prices. We see less delinquent tax revenue. We see increased car sales. We see increased interest income. And that'll help to partially offset the potential loss of state QBE midterm revenue. There are other factors that could impact the 2020 budget next year also. One is a continuing question of a potential new state K-12 education funding formula that we have discussed before. And another challenge that we might face, we don't know who the new Georgia governor is going to be, and we don't know how they view K-12 state funding. So that's another thing that we need to keep in mind. Because of these concurrent divergent factors, I recommend that we continue with a moderate conservative budget approach, waiting until the spring budget process and discuss the budget then when we have more data. My comment is that we may need to utilize a combination of additional revenue and possibly fund balance. We simply don't have enough data at this time. Mr. Chairman, these are my comments for today on the status of our most recent fiscal year, June 30th, 2018. And Mr. Chairman, I am available to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anybody questions? Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an item of note, if you take the cumulative $586 million in accumulated austerity cuts, that equals out to over 6,000 teachers. That's a lot of teachers that we have not been able to fund over the last 13, 16 years. So this has been handicapping us. And as Mr. Swinney has mentioned many times since our 2009, 2010 downturn in the economy, we've lost and we have not replaced almost 800 teachers. So we're still trying to catch up, and we haven't done it yet.
Mr. Banks, that's a good comment, and because I think it's important for us to know where we've been so we understand how we move forward, because that has been a drain on us.
And there's no end to it. Got a couple of questions. One is in Section A, the fund balances of June 30th. Does that include the loan to the Splash 5 projects? Is that in there at all?
The loan's included into the number, so we will get reimbursed this current fiscal year.
But you're not showing that here, though. That's committed.
I think that was after July 1st, so that's probably not part of that number.
Okay. All right. My mistake then. Okay. One question is, the general fund has two main sources of revenues, property taxes and the state of Georgia QBE revenue. What do revenue projections look like for next year?
So, as I stated before, on the right hand of your report in Section 2, you can see in terms of local revenue, you can see the growth in the digest. Okay. And I think that that's a good thing. The growth in the digest is something that will help us with our budget next year. You can see how the growth has steadily been rising, going from a low of negative 9% to this year a positive of 8.21%. I really don't know what to expect for next year, and we really won't know from the assessor until we get an estimate around March or April. But I think 8.21% might be a good place to start when we start working on the budget.
Do you feel like it would be unrealistic to say it's going to be 9%?
Anything's possible, but my conservative thing would be to say, let's just start with what it was this year. Because I think what happened this year was a good thing. We made a conservative estimate, and then when we got the final digest in June, we had more money, and it was more than we thought, and then we increased the raise.
Okay, a second question I've got is, what are the major challenges for our budget next year?
Well, every year it's a challenge to balance the budget, and there's always more needs than there are resources. And the thing about it is, too, sometimes we have new revenue every year, but our budget's not static. So when we prepare a budget, we're adding things like step increases for all eligible employees. So to suggest that we just have the same budget as last year is really not possible, because we have that step increase and the salary schedules built into the budget. Things like increased cost for utilities, all types of recurring things in the budget that could be challenges. Two challenges that I mentioned briefly in my presentation is, one is we're going to have a new Georgia governor, and it's going to be one of two people, and we need to understand quickly after someone's elected how they view K-12 education in Georgia and what the revenue funding might look like. And if people have clearly seen that there has been certain things floated, but we really don't know until the governor's elected and when the governor submits a budget. So we'll know a lot more in January how we stand with that. Another thing that concerns me is a new QBE type formula, and that's been hanging around for several years. So where does that go? Does it fall off the radar, or does that move forward? I don't know. But I really don't know how that might impact us. So those are several challenges that we might face.
Okay. A third question I've got is, what is the impact of the age 62 and older exemption, and do we have any future projections on how this exemption will impact our budget?
Okay, the impact of the age 62 exemption, and we frequently present this data just so that people understand how we prepare the budget. But the exemption has increased from revenue lost in 2012 from 62 million to this year revenue lost of 111 million. So it's been steadily increasing over the past 5, 6, 7 years. It's hard to project the age 62 exemption other than looking at the trend than what we've seen and experienced in the past. And Mr. Banks, you did talk to me one time about contacting the Cobb Tax Commissioner's office, and I did that. And one thing is there a way that they have data in their system that we can try to project this and make some sort of a trend line? To my surprise, they just recently started collecting birthdays on their database. So it's pretty interesting that they hadn't had that in previous years, but they probably only have 2, 3, 4 years of birthdays on citizens in Cobb County. So it's pretty hard to project. All they know is whoever had it the year before continues, and whoever applies for it, they get it, and then that's the increase. Okay. My guess is that we'll probably have to continue with conservative estimates just based on some type of a trend. But with the amount of money we deal with, it makes me nervous a little bit to make estimates when we don't have data.
Well, I think we could probably explore that a little bit further by using some of the census data, which does have birth dates. So, we can talk about that some more. Okay. But I think there's a way of getting that data so that we can see what the impact's going to be 5, maybe 10 years from now based on the current population.
That might be helpful.
Yeah. My last question is, how do online sales and the sales taxes associated with this impact our budget?
So sales tax impacts our budget through the SPLOST program. The Georgia Department of Revenue collects our sales tax. We do have limited ability to audit their figures to make sure that the sales tax we receive is correct. Actually, I did do a little bit of research on this. The Department of Revenue is bound by current law, which protects taxpayers and company tax information. And actually, it's a coded law, OCGA 48-2-15, where they can't give out company information. So it's hard to know. It would be an interesting question for me to say, well, a certain company in Cobb, how much sales tax did they remit? We can't get that information. Historically, online sales tax has been collected only if an online retailer has a physical presence in Georgia. There is an update to this because I recently saw an article in the paper where the Georgia governor signed House Bill 61 in May of 2018, which would require online retailers that make $250,000 more in sales or 200 sales a year to collect and remit sales tax. Furthermore, in that article, it read that states across the country have been tackling this issue in recent years, but they have run up against a ruling that the Supreme Court made 25 years ago that says you can't force retailers to collect sales tax unless they have a physical presence. But it is also my understanding that there is a Supreme Court issue pending and arguments are being made regarding the legality of this law, and hopefully they'll rule sometime on this. So that's a little bit out of my lane and getting into legal stuff here, but that's what I understand it to be.
So we have really absolutely no control over out-of-state vendors or companies. So if they're selling into Georgia, let's say they're in Ohio and they're selling into Georgia, they should be collecting sales tax for Georgia, but we have no way of controlling that. Is that correct?
Well, currently, if they have a physical presence,
But let's say
they're
they
supposed to
don't have a
remit it.
presence, but like maybe Amazon.
Now, Amazon does submit sales tax, believe it or
Because
not.
they got a presence here in Georgia, but if they didn't, that's a massive amount of money that we would not be getting.
But I'm sure that the most recent law that was signed in by the governor, House Bill 61, those companies that have sales of 250,000 or more, or 200 sales transactions each year, if that's upheld by the Supreme Court, that could change things, but who knows what that'll take, the time frame on that.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to see what kind of impact that will have in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Johnson, thank you very much again for such a great detailed report, and I really want to extend my sincere appreciation for you and your entire department for doing such a marvelous job managing our funds. To hear those comments about us having elite financial status, these AAA credit ratings, is truly remarkable, because I know with the fluctuating revenues that school districts have, it's very, very difficult for a school district to attain these kinds of ratings.
We don't have some of the fund balance that some of our competitors have, but we make up for it in our financial operations and how the board operates our policies and procedures. So we kind of make up for it, but it's not easy to maintain.
It's I would describe it as being scrappy.
Yeah.
The other thing I just want to highlight here is looking at D2, the property value digest growth, and this is really, I think, kind of the most important thing for the community to understand, is that it's taken us a full 10 years to just barely exceed the level of revenue that we had in 2009. I mean, that is a startling number. So just to put it in very simple terms, this school district with a larger student population, a considerably higher cost structure, is still operating on revenues that we were operating at in 2009. And back to the scrappy term, I mean, we're still able to attain a AAA credit rating. I mean, that is truly remarkable. You know, and I guess the other thing is just I did a quick summation of the numbers. The Cobb County School District Tax Digest singularly dropped $4.75 billion. $4.75 billion during the recession. I mean, that is a huge, huge, huge number, and it's just now that we're getting back above those numbers. I think I share your concerns too, relative to the future. I've sat in on numerous forums recently, and I was dismayed when I heard that we had individuals that weren't behind the number one legislative priority that the Cobb County School District has, which is seeking a cap on the $100 million on the fair share contribution. What that would mean, if that cap was in place, it would mean $55 million within the current school year of additional revenue that we could actually spend for things, very important things like increasing our teacher salaries and reducing classroom sizes. Money today that we don't have, and I don't foresee us having it in the foreseeable future. And then with regard to the budget, the budget is pretty much formulaic based on, I would say, the FTE of students, just to break it down very simply, so the full-time equivalency or enrollment, for lack of a better term. Let's say that we may capture more money through enrollment growth, but we have absolutely no assurance that the state will put more money into K-12 education. So does that mean if they continue to say, well, we're fully funding QBE, that they just fund it to exactly the same level as they are this year? Or do you know the answer to that question?
Well, when they say fully funding QBE, I take it to mean that there were no more austerity cuts.
Right.
But it's always an issue in the legislature, are they going to fund growth? I mean, it's not an automatic. They actually vote on it.
Right.
So that's something I hold my breath on every year, too.
All right, and then the last thing I would share is that with regard to the funding levels, what we see is that each year, it's always, a challenge, and I agree with you that we don't know if we're going to see the student growth side of things. But I consistently heard people saying, well, we want to go ahead and rewrite the QBE formula. We want to change and modify the QBE formula. And my feeling is that if that were to occur, I don't think Cobb would end up on the, on the positive side of that measure. And the reason being is that, the legislators and representatives and senators outside this metro area far outnumber those that are here within Cobb County. And the last thing I see them doing is voting themselves less money.
Well, when we have the notion of creating a new formula, unless there's more money put into the pot, it's still the same total. So if you have a new formula, it seems obvious that there are going to be winners and losers. And I don't know who the winners will be, and I don't know who the losers would be with a new formula. But just to create a new formula, I'm not sure if we'll win or lose on that.
The last question I have is, do you know, or has there been any discussions about the threshold for the fair share determination, equalization determination being moved, or is that going to remain static? Do we know?
I haven't heard any comments on that, so I assume it stays the same.
Okay.
So if you're below the 50th percentile of wealth per student, you will get none.
Okay.
And we are below.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mrs. Gamhorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of quick questions.
Sure.
And you and I talked about this the other day, so hopefully we can expand on it a little bit. I've been asked several times, how are we benefiting from the increased revenue because of the Braves and the battery? Okay. And my question to you the other day is, do we see a tangible, separate increase in monies, when I say separate from what we used to get on that? And I just leave it at that and let you expand on that. Maybe I can get another question in.
Yeah, I wrote down some notes on that. So there was a recent Georgia Tech study that the impact from the stadium and the battery, we would get somewhere in the neighborhood, I don't know, of a range of $8 to $12 million. But as we looked at it and we tried to analyze some of those numbers, that is built into the 8.21% growth that we received this year. So we did get more money in the digest. The stadium itself is on the tax-exempt digest, but the property surrounding it, we do get property tax for those. So the digest jumped from 6% growth from the previous year to 8.21% this year, which is a good thing. And part of that is the Braves Stadium. It's all part of the big total that we get. And it's all handled through the tax assessor and Cobb County Tax Commissioner's office. I believe your question is, some people might say, well, we have more money, what are we doing with it? And the budget is not a static thing, it's a dynamic thing. So each year we have increased costs. So we need new money to be able to keep functioning as a school district. And one of the examples I mentioned before is that we have salary schedules and we have step increases. So it costs about $12 million to fund step increases. Well, that's new money that we have to spend that's different than more than the previous year. We have all types of things in the budget, like inflation with utilities and all those types of things, where the budget keeps expanding. And then, of course, if we give raises to our teachers, that expands the budget too. So when you talk about Here's the different types of spending increases that we had this year. $12 million for a salary step. It was $25 million for the TRS increase. From
No, I know you said it, but I want to emphasize, this is not total. This is just what we, on top of what we were already paying, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right. This is incremental numbers. $25 million for the TRS increase from 16% to over 20%. We had to annualize classified health insurance last year for $3.6 million. We had a 1.1% salary increase initially before we knew the digest, and then it increased to $2.6 million. And then we gave a teacher bonus as well. We also increased the teacher pool by 13 positions. So yes, we do have more money, but this is how we incrementally spend it. And the board goes through the priorities and makes decisions, and that's where we ended up this year.
That, you mentioned from last year, or years, we had 6% digest, but now we have 8.5.
8.21.
Okay, 8.2. But that 2.2 would be from other improvements in the county too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So the battery and the Braves are not the full 2.2.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, houses are reassessed, residential properties reassessed, commercial properties reassessed, and the Braves. It's all lumped into one digest.
I guess one of the things besides wrestling, when somebody asks me that, okay, but what I'm hearing from you is that it really, the Braves and the battery wasn't a panacea of a gold mine, if you will. I mean, everything helps, but I don't see that big explosion of money that everybody thinks we're supposed to get.
Well, let me jump in on that because, again, the fiscal impact that was done, the fiscal impact study that was done, Brad and I looked at the numbers presented from that study and then looked at the digest growth. While there are many factors in that, the numbers lined up. So, yeah, we didn't win the lottery, and that was kind of my statement to the media that day, is you got to keep in mind a 1% pay raise is about $9 million, give or take. So the number that was part of that fiscal impact study was 14.8, I believe, and that was from the halo effect. That was the halo effect, the battery, and the stadium, and a 1.1 million increase in sales tax for lottery for SPOST. So yes, we didn't win the lottery, but it was a significant increase in revenue. So it definitely is significant. But like you said, it's not like it's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But it is definitely significant that it benefited our revenue in county, not from the state, but in county.
And those are big number increases, and they are significant. But in the context of a $1.1 billion budget, how significant is it? I mean, that's for you all to decide.
Yeah. To change the subject on you a little bit, is our unassigned fund balance is approximately $110 million, right? 109 something.
Correct.
Okay. And I know how conservative you are, so I'm not, I know you'd like to see it $1 trillion maybe. But should we as a board press to increase that? I mean, that seems like a lot. I know we like to see for contingencies and emergencies. Is that really enough? And I'll ask the superintendent and or you.
Well, the current board policy is to strive to maintain a 1-month reserve. We have operated the last 5, 6, 7 years depending on finances estimates, and I feel comfortable that we can continue to make good estimates as long as we stay conservative. And with that approach, 1 month reserve or a little over it, I think we can manage with it, and we've been managing with it. Now, the board may decide something different.
Okay. And I don't know. I mean, and I was part of that where we moved it from 60 to 30 days, so, but with increased monies, and I know we're spending more based on our requirements and our obligations. I didn't know if we might want to revisit that, so that's food for thought. Last thing, what do you think the impact was? You know, the legislature passed a law for tax scholarships or tax credits, whatever they are, from 55 million, I think, to 100 million for charter schools. Now, in my mind, that's not going to allow them to increase our private schools. Yeah, for private schools. But wherever it's going, it's coming out of the big pot, the big pie, and the pie's only so big. So I don't see them really looking at giving us more money. Am I wrong in that?
It's hard to speculate until the governor's selected and until they produce their first suggested budget. And at that point, we'll know some more concrete data, and then the board can start talking about it.
But that 100 million has to come from, or the extra 45 million has to come from somewhere.
The state increases revenue. Last year, I believe, I read in the paper, it went up by about 900 million. So it may be coming from an increased state revenue, or it may be a reallocation. I don't know.
Okay. All right. And good job. And as always, I'm just amazed at you and your staff and how well you know the numbers, track the numbers, and keep us out of the red ink, pun intended. So, and I yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scamhorn. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be quick. Mr. Johnson, can you remind us what the cost of a 1% raise for teachers is approximately?
Well, next year it'll be somewhere in the range of $9 to $9.5 million.
Wait a minute. Wait, are you saying just teachers or all employees?
Just teachers.
That's just teachers.
Oh, just teachers. It's going to be 7.5 or something like that.
Okay. And the reason I want to bring this up, Mr. Scamhorn brought up some good points relative to a Brave Stadium. Before the Brave Stadium was ever developed, I looked at the tax revenue that was coming in off the undeveloped properties, and it was bringing in a whopping $140,000 to the school district. And I believe the most recent estimates, and this is before the property is fully built out, before it is fully leased out, before buildings such as ThyssenKrupp elevator has even been built out. But already that development, the aggregate properties are delivering somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million in property taxes to the school district. So if we want to look at it in those terms, I mean, that's actually picking up a big chunk of what we were able to do as far as the raise for teachers this year. So in that sense, it has been a win. And then further, when that property is fully built out, the property tax that will actually be remitted to the school district will be significantly higher than the current $4 to $5 million that we're receiving.
Well, the abatements whatever is abated, that'll continue to get less and less.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Scamhorn, one more.
Yeah, he was through.
I just said that. Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Scamhorn, you one more.
Okay, I'll take one more. I meant to ask, what's our estimate on hiring a new teacher now? One teacher.
Around 93,000.
93,000?
And that includes fringes.
That's everything, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that increased is because of the increase in TRS from 16% to 20%. So that helped to increase that.
You anticipate my next question, because if I remember right, when I first came on the board a few years ago, we were guesstimating, I think, around 75,000 for everything. So that difference over the past 6 years is basically TRS, you think?
Well, it's TRS, step increases, and raises that we gave every year.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scamhorn. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Mr. Ragsdale, we now have board agenda items.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Agenda item number 1 is the monthly recurring agenda item for disposal of school district property. You've been sent that list electronically. Be able to answer any questions if you have them. Wait.
Any questions? Ms. Thayer?
I was just going to say consent.
I'm good with that. Any objections? 7-0. 6-0.
Agenda item number 2, I'm going to ask Mr. John Adams to come and bring this out.
Let me be the first to wish you good evening. Since it's 5:11, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Agenda item number 2, recommendation for approval of an annexation request. As you're aware, we are continuing to develop and finalize plans for a SPLOST-approved addition and modification to 514 Glover Street. We are aware that based on those plans, most of the planned addition lies within the city limits of Marietta. If you didn't know, this property is roughly bisected by the city of Marietta on this side towards Glover, and then unincorporated Cobb County on that side towards Lockheed and South Cobb Drive. But we have also become aware that under the planned footprint of the addition to this property, a very small piece of that will extend into unincorporated Cobb County. Obviously, for a variety of reasons, you want to have one building within one jurisdiction, and as part of our planning for permitting with the city of Marietta, they have asked us to approach the board to have a very small area of land in that direction that's currently in unincorporated Cobb annexed into the city of Marietta, so eventually the addition to this building will be within the city of Marietta's entire jurisdiction. That area is less than 1 acre in size. This is obviously at no cost to the district, but we're recommending that you approve our annexation request and then authorize us to submit the related documents for annexation, and there's some minor rezoning required as well to the city of Marietta. I'm available for any questions.
Without objection? Consent. 6-0.
Thank you. And then agenda item number 3, recommendation to approve a resolution authorizing an amendment to add waivers to the IE squared and Swiss contract. As you're aware, we previously, when it was IE squared, of course now it's Swiss, have applied and been approved by the state board to waive certain sections of the Title 20 laws. Tonight I'm going to give you a little bit of detail on some recommended personnel waivers and then a little bit less detail on 2 recommended academic waivers. You have heard us say many times, and it's true more than ever, that Cobb is the best place to teach, lead, and learn, and especially to teach. We have the best teachers in the nation, and it's because of this board and the superintendent that we have the best teachers and the best place to teach, lead, and learn. Evidence of that not only is the fact that we didn't make our teachers make up 7 snow days. We trusted them to be professionals and treated them like such. But also the presentation you saw earlier tonight about CTLS, equipping teachers to teach with the latest technology and getting out of their way. I'll remind the board that we're also the only district in Georgia of which I'm aware that specifically allows in policy for non-attorney representation in employee disciplinary conferences. Our annual evaluation appeal process has been used by teacher groups as an example for the state to potentially even adopt into state law. We're one of the few districts that has such an evaluation appeal process. And our own HR department recently presented to the PSC at their ethics conference on how to deal with employees and how to if need be, discipline employees. I will also respectfully remind the board that yours truly is one of the few CHROs who's actually defended teachers as well as worked in human resources. So I would argue that under Mr. Ragsdale's leadership, we are the most teacher-friendly district, certainly in the state, if not the nation. With that having been said, we've been operating as a state under something called the Georgia Fair Dismissal Act since 1975. That's OCGA 20-2-940. Now, in 1975, Gerald Ford was president. I was in 2nd grade, and John Floresta wasn't born yet. 75 was a while ago. So we are suggesting, you'll hear me describe the details in a minute, that it's time to move the needle ever so slightly towards 2018. Not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'll also note that since a recent 2015 appellate court decision, Day versus Floyd, that the Fair Dismissal Act no longer applies at all to about 1/3 of the systems in Georgia, those who are charter systems. we are recommending that we use the IE squared waiver process to make some very minor adjustments to the Fair Dismissal Act in Cobb so that we can manage this district like $1 billion, or pardon me, Brad, $1.1 billion organization in the 21st century. We have vetted these changes that I'll briefly enumerate in detail with both some principals and all of the teacher groups. We work collaboratively on this and have been very transparent and upfront about this process, and I think you're going to see a recommendation that all of the stakeholders can live with. Let me briefly just praise our teacher groups, and particularly the folks that lead them in Cobb. You may see things on the news about teacher groups up north and places like that. But we're blessed here in Cobb to have teacher groups that, while they very strongly and staunchly recommend and advocate for their members, they're also reasonable people, and we work together with a good rapport in a collegial atmosphere, and that is incredibly refreshing. So specifically, what are we recommending? First of all, we're not going to recommending we change much. We're recommending that we retain nearly all of the Fair Dismissal Act provisions. Tenure will remain unchanged. Tenure will remain unchanged in Cobb. 99% of our employees won't be affected. Most people will never notice a difference. What we are specifically recommending that we change, though, we're recommending that we implement a 90-day probationary period for new hires and for people on limited contract. This means that if you're new hire to Cobb County in the first 90 days, if for some reason it's not working out, we can, without giving an expensive hearing before the board costing thousands of taxpayer dollars, we can say to someone who's new, this is not working out. And then we won't have someone in front of children for an entire year who perhaps would not be ideal. It cuts both ways. So if an employee should come to us and decide it's not working out from their perspective, they can leave without penalty or fear of job abandonment during those first 90 days. We are still going to make sure that our teachers are entitled to the formal fair dismissal hearing for terminations and for tenured non-renewals, except in two cases. We are recommending that we no longer offer those formal hearings in the case of job abandonment. For example, we occasionally have a teacher who just kind of drops off the radar screen. And if we can't get a hold of that person, and if they can't or won't submit a resignation, sometimes we have to have expensive hearings costing thousands of dollars, occasionally even to have a hearing in someone's absence. We think that that's not a good use of taxpayer dollars, so we're recommending that instead of having that process, we go to a more informal process where the superintendent or his designee could send the person a certified letter. If they don't respond, then we could have a more informal process, but not a formal fair dismissal hearing. Similarly, if someone loses their certificate from the PSC, if a teacher had their certificate revoked, for example, we're recommending that we not have a formal fair dismissal hearing for that as well. Teachers will still be entitled to formal hearings, fair dismissal hearings for suspensions longer than 2 days. If it's 3 days or more, we're recommending that we keep everything currently in place. However, we are recommending that for a 1 or 2 day suspension, a short suspension, that we have an informal process, not an expensive fair dismissal hearing in front of the board, but instead due process with human resources, an informal hearing with the superintendent or his designee, still due process, but not quite the formal level that we currently have now. And again, that's just for 1 or 2 day suspensions, short-term suspensions only. Other districts have adopted that process and gone as far as 20 days. We're not recommending that we go as far as that in Cobb, just 1 or 2. And then last but not least, we're recommending that the contract non-renewal deadline, in the law, the contract non-renewal deadline is May 15th. If we don't affirmatively non-renew someone by that date, then their contract automatically rolls over. We're recommending that we extend that 2 weeks to June 1st. I will remind the board that 98% of our employees get their contracts in early February renewed because we are typically the first district in the state of Georgia to offer contracts. We think there's value to that, so this would only apply to a very small slice of employees, 2%, but it would benefit them. It would give those employees more time to finish their annual evaluation process, and then also important to them is should they get an unsatisfactory, to then appeal it before we have to make a decision about non-renewal. So those extra 2 weeks, while seeming very minor, would actually go a long way towards giving us better data to make a decision and give the employee a chance to try to demonstrate satisfactory job performance. Again, only affecting a tiny slice of employees. We think these very minor, modest changes under the IE squared waiver process to our personnel practices will allow us to remain the best place to teach, lead, and learn, but also increase our efficiency and save our taxpayers a significant amount of money. You also have in your documentation a summary of what I've outlined there. As far as the latest batch of academic waivers, there are only 2. We are recommending that we waive the comprehensive health and PE state board rules. Those have been expanded lately to include K through 4 as well, and the guidance along that is probably not what we would like to see it be at this point in the process, so we're recommending that we waive that. That'll give us flexibility. And then similarly, flexibility in the law regarding online learning. That would allow us to be more innovative, particularly using our Georgia Virtual School or any other program we might happen to design. So two academic waivers, comprehensive health and PE, and then some flexibility from the online learning law. And I'm now available for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams, just to restate this, all the teacher groups are good with this, all these changes? There's no problems or anything like that with them? Just restating that. I mean, we've said that before, but
yes, sir.
We've
met with them.
Reemphasize that to the.
And you can hear Ms. Jackson chime in. Yes, they are. We've met with them a couple of times, collectively and individually over a course of a few months, as recently as last week, and involved them in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Worked collaborative and said, what's the best thing for kids? What can we all live with? So this is really a group effort.
I think that's important. If there's no objection.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to see it move to discussion, just in the event that one or two teachers might have a comment at the night meeting that can't be here now.
Okay.
I certainly have no objections, but I think it would be better if it was on the discussion for tonight.
Any objection? That's discussion.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Dr. Kevin Daniel to come forward and bring agenda item number 4.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent. Agenda item number 4 is a recommendation of naming the Smyrna area new middle school as listed in the SPLOST 5 notebook. The school will provide attendance relief to Griffin Middle School and to Campbell Middle School. In accordance with Administrative Rule FDC-R, naming new facilities, nominations were accepted from the public for possible names, and this occurred between August the 20th and October the 1st. I'd like to thank John Floresta and his communications team. They did an excellent job getting the word out and letting people know how to make a nomination for that school. Also, our schools got the word out as well. A name selection committee was established and coordinated by Paul Gillahan, and that is the principal at Griffin Middle School. They met to discuss procedures, the names, discuss options, and ultimately they voted on a name. The committee selected Susan Todd Pearson Middle School as the recommended name for the new Smyrna area middle school. Give you a little background. Susan Todd Pearson served on the Cobb County School District Facilities and Technology Committee for more than 10 years, several years as the chair. In addition, she was the founding member, or one of the founding members, of the Campbell High School Education Foundation and remained a member throughout the remainder of her life, even serving as the chair of the foundation. The foundation has named the annual golf tournament in her honor, and they've also established an annual college scholarship in her name. She was very active in the PTSA and the Smyrna area public schools, as well as the booster clubs that support the athletic programs at Campbell High School. In addition to her service to the Smyrna public schools, she was also active in the community. She was a member of the Smyrna Optimist Club, where she led the Read by Grade 3 project, organizing members to commit to go into the public schools and to read to students and to classes. Throughout her life, she led community outreach programs that included tutoring and mentoring programs, especially and oftentimes for students in need. As you can see, she was a lifelong learner who valued education. The next two most preferred names were Jonquil Middle School and Smyrna Middle School. It is the recommendation of the superintendent that you approve the naming of the Smyrna area new middle school, Susan Todd Pearson Middle School. This name would take effect with the opening of this new school. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Any questions? Ms. Thayer? Comments?
First of all, I'm extremely pleased, and there was much more to Susan Todd Pearson than we've ever said here today. But I would like to suggest that we move this to the night meeting for discussion then for my community's sake and for her family's sake. Okay?
Good with that. That'll be on the discussion for tonight. Mr. Scamhorn?
It's sort of piggybacking on, I'm not familiar with her, but I would love to see a bio a little more extent, like Susan just said, there was a lot more about her. I would like to learn a little more about her, if there's a bio or something that you could hand out to the board members. Anyway, thank you.
That works. Any other questions? Well, I think they can come up with that. If there's any other questions, then we'll go on to the approval of the agenda. If there's no objection, the agenda is approved, and I need a motion to go into executive session for personnel, land, and legal. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Make a recommendation. We adjourn to executive session to discuss land, personnel, and legal matters.
Thank you, Mr. Chastain. It's a second on that. All in favor? Mr. Scamhorn, are you in?
Yeah, I'm all yours.
Okay, we have a 7-0 on that, and we are now adjourned and return at 7 o'clock.